Coming to you from Blue Crew Studio in Temecula, California, it's the Whiskey Throttle Show, taking you inside the lives and careers of the legends and leaders of action sports. Today's guest is brought to you by Yamaha. Yamaha is the industry leader in 2- and 4-wheel fun and performance. Motocross, off-road, adventure, side-by-side, Yamaha sets the standard. Yamaha revs your heart. The Whiskey Throttle Show is presented by Motorsport.com. It doesn't matter if you like to pull a throttle cable on a dirt bike, street bike, side-by-side. Motorsport.com is putting riders first with parts, gear, and accessories, including some of our partners like Troy Lee Designs, Dunlop, Pro Circuit, and more. They offer first returns free on apparel so you can buy with confidence. And Motorsport.com offers fast, free shipping on all orders over $79. Make your next ride your best ride. Visit Motorsport.com. Troy Lee made a name for himself as the most elite helmet painter in all forms of motorsport racing. His ability to make a stationary object look fast is something rare. That creativity gave way to motocross and mountain bike gear, helmets, and an arsenal of protective equipment aimed at keeping racers on the track and out of a doctor's office. The 2025 TLD line is out, and it's as fast as ever. Troy Lee Designs, blending speed and style. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here at the Whiskey Throttle Show in Blue Crew Studio. And we're really excited today for our guest, a guy I've known a long time. I've worked with as an amateur and even more as a pro or former or past pro on a lot of our media stuff. You guys are very familiar with Race Tech. This is the boss, the big boss here at Race Tech. One of the most iconic suspension brands in the sport. Been around forever. And now getting into some engines, we're going to talk to Paul Thede. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me, David.
You know, I got to start this out. We kind of kick all our shows off with our motorsport.com whole shot segment here. You can get everything you need at motorsport.com, guys. Save yourself, free shipping. You don't need to drive to a store. Just get it at motorsport.com. Great company, and they make everything. So my first question for you, has anyone ever told you that you're a John Bon Jovi doppelganger? Every time I see you, I just I start singing a Bon Jovi song.
I have not ever gotten that one.
Never heard that.
Never heard that one. No.
Fans, please. Like, am I wrong? Put a bandana on, or I don't know, whatever Bon Jovi would wear.
I will take that as a compliment.
Yeah, you
there,
could go
David.
put a guitar on and go down to wherever he'd be signing autographs, and I think you'd sign some. That's crazy. You've never heard that.
I think I should charge for it, I guess,
Maybe
for
you can.
autographs.
Another seminar series you can do.
There you go.
You just got to learn to play the guitar. You're known for the gold valves and suspension, obviously, but you guys have been recently diving into motors. We'll talk more about it later, but I just wanted to kind of pick your brain, and I think in researching for the show, I figured out why you went this direction. Like, you've got a bit of a history there. It was kind of your roots, actually. But talk a little bit about the engine side of what you guys are doing now.
Well, I used to do engines way back. That was my first thing.
Yeah.
It's like horsepower.
Yeah, it was like PTP or something.
Paul Thede Porting.
Yeah.
You've done some homework, bud.
Yeah, I dug in. Like I said, I didn't know that about you. So
yeah, no, that was my first love, and horsepower was everything, and I actually have been around since before the suspension revolution, where when I started riding on, we had 4 or 5 inches of travel.
Yeah,
I know.
I think back to because I was a little young for that, but I think about the mountain bike industry. And when I first got my first mountain bike with suspension, it was this little rubber elastomers, but I was thrilled, right? Like, look at this.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's so much better. Yeah.
And now you see where that's gone. And I just imagine that's how it was with motorcycles too,
But yeah, so I was a motorcycle, I grew up in Hawaii, and I came out to Southern California to be in the motorcycle industry, and, put myself through college working on motorcycles and whatnot, but my first love was engines, and I would do all this, it's all 2-strokes, then, and I used to joke with some of the other guys, like 4 strokes, that's too many, and
I still joke with people about that.
Yeah, but anyway, I actually was doing engines, and got into a partnership. Actually, I was working for Marv Hendricks, who was owned Saddleback Park.
Oh, okay.
And and actually before that was Paul Thede Porting, which I was, again, working my way through college, and working out of Triumph Suzuki of Pomona, which is also a CZ dealership and whatnot, And anyway, so I actually went and worked for Marv. Marv had said, "Hey, let's do a performance division." Never really came through with that. And then I had some friends of mine that were customers and said, "Hey, let's get into business." And I got into ST Racing, which was a partnership with the Sands. And
is that Roland Sands' father?
No,
different Sands.
Richard Sands.
Okay.
Who was a racer back in the day and
Okay.
stuff. And anyway, that was a partnership. I was a 1/3 partner and doing the work. And
So did you, and I guess we can dive into this more later when we get to this, but, you're working with flow benches and porting and you like all that stuff. Did you guys ever get into exhaust? Was that ever part of what you guys were doing?
My senior project in college, so I went to Cal Poly Pomona, and I have an engineering degree.
Okay.
And my senior project was expansion chamber development. But in order to do the expansion chamber development, they didn't have a dyno that I could test with.
Oh.
So I ended up building a dyno.
Okay. Of course you did.
At Cal Poly, well, of course I did. And it was a digital dyno, but it was a very crude digital dyno, but it was very repeatable.
Yeah.
A steady state dyno. And anyway, it ended up taking all the time. I actually never did all the testing on the expansion chambers that I wanted to, but I built this really neat dyno. And, but obviously that was important to be able to do that. But I actually was working a little bit with Bill's Pipes, trying to work a deal where we would be involved in some of the development, but rebranding really mostly. And because Bill's did a great job of building pipes too.
Yeah. He's sharp. That guy. I mean, he and Jeff. I mean, they made some of the fastest stuff in the world there for a while with Henry and Lammy and during that era.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, we'll get more into it. I just kind of was curious, why now? After such a successful run with the suspension, why add that in now?
Well, actually, I'd gotten out of it because I was so busy with suspension, and I was doing all the development with the two strokes with the engines, and I remember I did approximately 500 hours of testing and development on one model. 250s were easy, 500s were super simple, 125s were like, that's the real challenge, And I 500 hours, and I think I sold like 25 of them, after I was done. And they were very expensive. And I did Danny Chandler, Magoo, I did his stuff, and on and on, and they would all pay, because I'm going, I can't afford to not. But if I looked at the bottom line on, I was losing money, and so I actually got Varner to do the actual grinding and stuff, and that eventually we just kind of phased into not doing engines anymore, and we're just so busy with doing suspension. And then basically what happened is I hired Rob Brown, which I'll talk about, I'm sure, in this, because he's my right-hand guy, and he and Sydney are just phenomenal. They've made a huge difference in race tech, and he had done engines and suspension back in Chicago. Went through divorce and said, okay, I'm going to do different stuff. Sold off all his equipment for doing engines to a kid that had, my understanding, had inherited $5 million from his grandfather. And Rob comes to me one day and he goes, we might be able to get my equipment back. Are you interested if we do? And I said, sure, why not? And sure enough, about 2 years later, this kid had run through all the money and said, hey, doing engines is, I think the machines mostly were still wrapped up, Anyway, he brought them out, delivered them to us, and we got them for pennies on the dollar.
Jeez.
And I had them sitting there because I knew I wasn't going to be that guy. Rob wasn't going to be that guy. So we had to find that guy. And that was probably a 4-year process. And we finally found Andrew Flores, who's my engine guy.
Okay.
And so he refurbished the machines and brought them out, and we set everything up. And actually, he's been with me now this week 10 years.
Oh, is that right? Jeez.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. See, I think a lot of people maybe don't know that you guys are doing that. I think it takes some time to kind of get the word out because you're so entrenched in suspension.
Yeah.
when people hear the name, that's what they go to, right?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to it. We're going to cover all of it, and we'll hit that point in it. Guys, I want to just encourage you to get over to whiskeythrottlemedia.com and check out everything we have going on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all kinds of moto, off-road, dual sport content. Let's get to our guest story. He's brought to you today by Yamaha. Whether you guys like 2 wheels or 4, Yamaha leads the way in reliability, performance, and just a lot of fun. They rev your heart, so check them out. Tell me about where you grew up. Were you a Central Calculus slow kid, I heard? I don't mean a slow kid. That came out wrong. San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, actually, born in Minnesota, but left when I was 2 because it was cold.
Yes.
And because I didn't really have a choice. But we moved to Central California, to Dixon, actually.
Okay.
Then my dad was finishing up his doctorate and, that kind of stuff. And we ended up moving to San Luis Obispo. So that's slow.
Gotcha.
SLO,
Yep.
Anyway, so we moved to San Luis Obispo, and that's actually where I got introduced to mini bikes.
Okay.
I had a friend of mine invite me to a birthday party, and this was back when
What year would this be when you moved out here?
Well, I wasn't here because I moved from San Luis to Hawaii and then Hawaii back to
Okay, when were you in San Luis, that area?
San Luis. Let's see.
I just like to get the eras right because...
Yeah, I was probably 9 years old, so that would have to be 64.
Okay.
And you can do the math, and I know I'm really old.
No, man, look, that was just a cool time for the sport because it was new and it was growing, and you kind of get, even pre-on any Sunday vibes, but just
no, it was lawnmower engine in a kind of a bent frame. The rear brake, we didn't have front brake because
did it have just the metal pad that pushed
against the and the tires were square because they were just whatever they had, but
off a wheelbarrow or something.
Yeah. So anyway, he invited me to his birthday party, and I got on that thing, and I went, "Oh my God, this is awesome! I don't have to pedal anymore," and it was just from then on. My direction of my life was completely different.
You fell in love right away.
Fell in love right away.
Did you do anything before that? Play other sports or?
Well, I played all the regular sports, except soccer because we didn't have soccer.
What? Soccer didn't exist?
Did not exist. In fact, there was a kid from Portugal that moved into our school and introduced us to soccer.
Poor kid. He's like, you don't even know what it is.
Yeah,
it's life.
It's football.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Anyway, but. Yeah, actually, my parents said I couldn't have a mini bike.
Oh.
I can't have a motorcycle, can't have a mini bike. Well, they went away to conference that was a week long once a year. Well, they went off the conference. During that week, I had a friend give me a broken lawnmower, and I fixed the engine. So I'm 10 years old, and I go, it's like just take stuff apart until you, and look, well, that doesn't look right? And so I knew it needed a spark, and I knew it. Anyway, I fixed the engine, and I bought a frame used from some guy for $5. And I went down to the lawnmower shop and bought a centrifugal clutch for another $5. And by the time my parents came back, I had a mini bike.
You're kidding me.
And so,
how did you know how to work? Your dad was a mechanical engineer or something?
My dad had a degree in electrical engineering, but he was a minister. So he had a doctorate in philosophy or theology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm a preacher's kid.
PK. So is my wife. Yeah. Yeah, I know about you guys.
Yeah, well, they usually one of two ways. Either they're really, really good or they're really, really bad. And somehow or another, I think
you came out.
I was in the middle. But
any siblings?
Older brother, younger sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did Big Bro get into bikes too, or?
No.
So it was kind of just your thing.
Just me.
Honed in on it. Okay.
Just me. And
all right. So how? I'm thinking back to me at 10. I'm not pulling apart I'm not building a lawnmower engine. You don't just do that instinctively. Had you been kind of watching your dad? Did he help you work on stuff?
No, in fact, I used to always, being a rebellious kid, it's like, I'm not mechanical, and my dad would go, no, son, you're mechanical. He said, whenever you help me, you know where to point the flashlight.
Yeah, that was my job too.
Yeah, and I could take a nut and reach around in the back,
hold it there for him,
and spin it onto a thread, and he goes, no, you're mechanical. And I anyway, I couldn't argue with him too much. But, you know, it's one of those things where when I wasn't being right about not being mechanical and he leaves for, you know, it's like, well,
I built a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Can I keep it?
So it ran okay?
Yeah, no, it was great. It was, you know, and it was a stepping stone.
Pull start?
Yeah.
Like a little Tecumseh engine or whatever the heck they were?
Little Briggs & Stratton,
Okay.
1.5 horsepower.
That's so awesome. And that was really the thing. I was born in 75, and I mean, when I got started, a bunch of my buddies in my neighborhood had, I don't know, you know, what brand, maybe it was a Taco. I don't know what the heck it was.
Taco
but it was the
22
same thing. Yeah.
was my buddy's bike, was Taco 22.
Those were the thing.
Yeah.
All right, so how long did you ride that? Did your parents get mad? Like, what did they say? If you're a parent, you'd have to be like, wait, how you did what? And hold on, I didn't want you to have a bike, but you built that? You know, like, I can't even get mad at you.
The forgiveness thing, you know, ask for forgiveness. You know, unfortunately, my children may listen to this. You know,
yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I don't remember really getting a bunch of resistance to it. And, you know, I made sure I bought a Bell helmet, which was the best because I didn't have a $5 head, you know, and it was open face, you know, and yeah, and we just started riding. And actually then my dad transferred to Hawaii, and I was selling my mini bike because we're moving to Hawaii.
Okay.
And he worked with University of Hawaii with the Methodist Church with the college students.
Okay.
And anyway, so I'm getting the bike ready. These guys are coming over to look at it, and I'm getting it ready, and I'm adjusting the chain, and I feel in the chain. My foot slips off the brake pedal, and it rolls back through the chain and sprockets. So, you know, I've got, that's,
you do, you got a little half
that's
a finger.
my little trigger finger, you know, it's like, you know, I do this jokes and these jokes, you know.
So you did that as a kid?
I did that as a kid. And the biggest thing I was worried about was whether my parents were going to take my mini bike away, you know, and actually I'd had two at that point.
You didn't think that's your braking finger?
It was my trigger finger. I want to get out of going to, you know, anyway, but, yeah, anyway, but, you know, and actually the bone is flat. It looks like my fingernail. I was home alone, and I was like holding this, my finger's off in the chain. My sister found it later. And I'm calling up my dad, you know, the dial phone.
Rotary phone. Yeah.
You know, Dad, I cut off my finger. Can you come home? You know, and my joke is you know, it's like, yeah, I'll be home in a little bit, son, you know. You know, but, but anyway, you know, I'd had two mini bikes, and I was selling the one. And I actually kept the other one when we moved to Hawaii.
Okay. What was the other one?
The homemade one.
Oh, okay.
They were both kind of homemade. The other one had a Taco 22 with a West Bend two-stroke engine in it. You know? All right. So it's some horsepower there.
That was a racer.
That was a racer, baby.
Okay, so you guys moved to Hawaii. He's got this job there working for the college. How was that? This would have been, what, about 70? Late 60s?
Early 8. Yeah, so 68 maybe?
Okay.
Something like that.
So what was, I mean, that had to be a pretty cool time over there, actually, huh? But maybe, did they not like Howleys? You know, was it kind of tough?
You know, it's funny you should mention that. It was a really, really neat experience for me personally, because going to Hawaii, being able to feel racism. I was in Berkeley in the 60s, and, you know, my dad finished college there and whatnot. And I remember going and playing Oakland with baseball, and there's these black kids, you know, they somehow or another, they put me in as pitcher, and they called the game after like 22 runs in the first inning. And we never, you know, it's like, but, you know, going to Hawaii, there are two Hawaiis, my viewpoint. And there's the, you know, aloha, love, melting pot, you know, all the races, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's, you know, try to go surfing, dude. And there are places that you just do not surf. You don't, you know, unless you know somebody there.
Yeah.
And so I was surfing over there and didn't really ride motorcycles. You know, my mini bike was just sitting there. I didn't know where to go or anything, you know, and
did you surf here before you went? Like, no.
Have you been in the water here?
I surf here, but it's terrible.
It's cold.
Yeah, up north it's real sharky and cold. Yeah.
Well, yeah, those little things. But so yeah, I surfed, and I got to where I was kind of board of little waves, which was a lot of South Shore stuff, and then the big waves when they were there. The surf wasn't always up,
Right.
and then sometimes I didn't feel welcome, and anyway, I just sit there and I go, man, I just want to ride motorcycles again. And so I actually ended up finding a place to ride, Wailaiki Ridge, which was a couple, ridges away from where I was. And
You guys were in Honolulu area?
yeah, actually behind Kaimoki, back behind Diamond Head, and up in the mountain there. And
Yep.
I actually bought a Honda 90 that was broken. And,
Of course.
And of course, for almost nothing,
Yeah.
I bought that so that my friends had something to ride. So I had my mini bike. My friends had something to ride. I would take our Dodge Dart with the bumper hitches. I'd go and shuttle one bike up, and I'd come back and get the other bike and shuttle it up, and then and the guys and whatever, and then we'd go ride and up on Wailaiki Ridge. And
Was it just trails? And
trails, yeah, all trails. There'd be some places where there was a little mini track that was, as big as your yard,
Right.
that we'd ride on. But and then I got a Yamaha 90 Enduro, and then that was a whole, that was my first real motorcycle,
Okay.
And then I actually got invited out, so got in with some different people that actually rode, and there were a couple places to ride, but.
Now, were these Hawaiian guys?
No, well, no, no.
Okay.
But there were guys that lived in Hawaii, not Hawaiian guys per se, but basically, we started going out to watch the races, which was at an old airstrip,
Okay.
down kind of Aiea area, and anyway, got in and started knowing some of the people, and actually John DeSoto's dad, Cobra DeSoto, was like Cobra. Yeah, it was his name, and so he had,
It's an aggressive name.
yeah, well, he lived out. They lived out Waianae side, which is past Makaha, and it's a pretty tough area. But a lot of places are tough unless you know somebody. And once you're accepted, you're welcome, and it was amazing. So actually, my kind of connection to kind of a different world of Hawaii was through motorcycling and through all
The
that.
DeSotos and that?
Yeah, the DeSotos and all that.
That it's super interesting. I've only experienced what you're talking about because I've got some friends that live in Kauai, and it's a little more mellow. But Sonny Garcia, we had gone over for a race, and he took us surfing. Mm-hmm. A group of us, maybe 5-6 of us. And I'll never forget this. And Sonny, gosh, I miss him. We paddled out, and there's a bunch of locals there. And it was, shoulder high waves. It was just decent. For them, probably not great, but very localized. Mm-hmm. If we had paddled out there without him, we're getting punched. Or, you know what I mean?
My wave.
And he paddles out, and he goes, hey, these are my guys' waves. Beat it. And there was like 7 of them. They just paddled away.
Really?
Yeah. Sonny was a god over there.
Wow. Yeah, no, I bet.
And
yeah.
at the time, I was kind of like, well, that's kind of weird, but whatever, cool. And, now thinking back on it, I'm like, it's like someone coming to the track and going, hey, you guys, you kooks, beat it. My guys are riding today.
Yeah.
Leave the track, Not just like, hey, let my guys surf with us. It's like, no.
But go water it for us, too.
Yeah, go grab a hose and prep this track.
Prep this for us.
It was wild. So I kind of get that local.
Yeah, and what I was saying is it was really kind of eye-opening for me to experience, because it's one thing to talk about racism and whatnot. It's another to feel it. And then, obviously to try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is a good trick, but.
Did you learn any pidgin?
All the howlies that would come and start speaking their version of pidgin, I'd sit there and go, oh, God, dude, just talk how you normally talk. Will you, please, But
I know, it's kind of laughable, but
yeah.
it does happen, though. If you spend enough time there and you start saying...
Yeah, no, I mean, you start pronouncing tree instead of three, and but, I just never felt comfortable doing that, really, but...
that would be cultural appropriation today, and you'd be scorned for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep going, because there's something interesting here about the only track on Oahu. You were involved in it.
Yep. No, I was one of the founding members of the HMA, which is Hawaii Motorsports Association. But basically, with John Cobra DeSoto, John was actually off racing, so I never even met John.
He was already stateside.
He was already stateside and world and doing whatever but Cobra and Paul and those guys. Anyway, they basically lobbied in the government to go and get some land available. It's a lot of the land up in the mountains is military or government land for watershed and that kind of thing. But there's a piece of land out at Kahuku, which is the farthest tip, the northernmost point of the North Shore. There was some land up there, and I actually lobbied for getting that land. They allowed us to do it. I helped build that track and
it's
facility.
Crazy.
And
Kahuku is iconic. I mean, speaking of Sonny, that was his place to ride, and any of the surf guys that rode moto, that was their spot. That's the only place to ride on that island, really.
It's the only place legally to ride.
Yeah, right.
At Waianae Valley, there's a lot of riding in there, but again, you'd have to be.
Yeah, and if you get caught on the wrong guy's land.
Yeah, there you go. But actually, in Oahu, you could ride all the way from Sandy Beach, which was, kind of easternmost southern tip, past Hawaii Kai.
Okay.
Down there. So you could ride all the way to Kahuku.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't get hassled?
Nobody's out there.
Okay.
Yeah, and the canyons, the valleys, it's like you're riding like this. I remember one time it started to rain. That red dirt, right?
Oh, yeah.
It gets slicker than
gorilla
just.
stuff. Yeah.
We're out there and we're hooking up with we were with a guy with a Rokon. Do you remember those things?
Yeah.
Two-wheel drive,
yeah.
West Bend engine. It had tractor tires on it, two-wheel drive. And what he would do is he would just slip with both wheels instead of getting more traction. We're in there. There was 4 or 5 of us. We're ending up grabbing onto little tree roots and hauling the bikes up these kind of off-camber hills. There's a motorcycle down in there that had been stripped.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
You need block and tackle.
They couldn't get out of it.
Yeah. I
couldn't get out of there. It's some again neat stories. So thanks for.
Well, and they there's guys on Kauai that do like a hare scrambles or like an off-road ride, and they're always. I got a couple buddies that are always telling me, "Hey, come do it," and I'm like. No way. No way. I've seen that dirt when it gets wet, and it's always wet. No, thank you. I mean, it is like riding on.
It's snot, man.
Snot,
it's just.
There's another story. We came up. I helped promote this race one time. It was supposed to be in Honolulu at the Blaisdell Arena. Long story. The promoter got messed up. We ended up at this stock car track out of town. It ended up being a nightmare, but to kind of shoot some photos for it, Simon Cudby took us all. We found this little beach. North of town a little bit, but just this piece of sand, and kind of in the background you could see Honolulu, and we're just doing wheelies on the beach. Josh Hansen, Mike Metzger was there with us. Ryan Morris. There's a handful of us. Anyway, we're just doing this stuff for photos, right? We're not out there hammering motos or anything. And these 4 or 5 big Hawaiian dudes come out, and they are pissed. Uh-huh. And we're like, all going, what do we do? And Metz rides over to him, and they recognized him. Oh, Mike Metzger, and saved our ass. I think we were going to all get beat up. And thank God they recognized Metz. He saved us. So
there you go.
But
it doesn't surprise me at all.
Know what I mean? They're scary.
Yeah.
They'll pick up a rock and just bash your head.
No, and like I say, once you're accepted, very loving, very accepting, I mean, seriously, again, like I said, the difficult thing is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. How do you?
That's interesting to go over there and you were the minority.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, I can't put myself in somebody else's shoes, but like I say, it was to have at least that little taste of it was something that I appreciate having that.
Sure. Yeah. Helps your perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long did you stay there before you came back this way? And you came over here for college, right? You said to Cal Poly?
Yeah, to Cal Poly. Basically, I wanted to get into motorcycles, and I wanted to my first. Well, I did paper route. I worked at McDonald's.
Over there?
As a laborer stocking drywall sheets of drywall.
So you had some crappy jobs.
Yeah, I had some interesting jobs, and then I started working as a motorcycle mechanic at Montgomery Motors, which is still there right now. They were Harley and Bultaco dealership back then.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and
so just hold on. This whole thing, lobbying the government to have this track built, you did that as a high school student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
cool.
I was just one of the people there. I wasn't like the main guy pushing or anything,
yeah.
but it was neat to be a part of that,
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was working as a mechanic, and then again, Southern California. I applied to go to LA Trade Tech.
Okay.
So my parents were it's like, hey, whatever you want to do, son, wherever you want to go.
What was LA Trade Tech?
It was a community college.
Okay.
And they had a motorcycle mechanics program.
Okay.
And so I wanted to go to LA Trade Tech. They didn't let me because I was from out of state.
Oh.
So I went, okay, well then what else? And so I was offered a scholarship at Harvey Mudd, which is one of the Claremont colleges, engineering school.
Okay.
And then there was Cal Poly. Again, I wanted to be in Southern California in
racing
this area,
Mecca,
in the racing Mecca, and I turned down the scholarship from Harvey Mudd because I had heard that Cal Poly had lathes and you could build stuff there, and it was super practical, and et cetera, et cetera. So I went to Cal Poly Pomona, and what I would do is my parents helped me out whatever they could, but I existed on working as a mechanic and some grants and scholarships and that kind of stuff.
Is there campus living there, or where did you live?
Lived on campus for the first year.
Okay.
That was a trip. That was really neat to be able to do that too.
And what year would that have been?
That would be 73.
Okay.
So 73. Yeah.
These are the late 1900s.
Yeah.
So what was the scene like in 73 here? This is what I love hearing as guys that grew up here in that era, because even in the early 90s when I moved out here, it was so open. And, you could – I feel like Temecula area was what Orange County was in the 70s. You could just take off and ride in these hills in the valley, and in Irvine and wherever, which is unthinkable now, right?
Yeah, well, and the more that I'm around, I learn how much more was available at that point in time, because I was a moto guy. It's like I wasn't a go trail ride guy. I was a moto guy. It's like I wanted to go see how much faster I could go every single lap, and that kind of thing. And I had my first real dirt bike was a 1971 Mako 250 square barrel.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I sold that to come to college, and then I went and bought a CZ because it was like $700, right? Brand new.
Okay.
And it was 500 pounds. I mean, it was 300 pounds or whatever that thing was. It was a tank. But I bought a CZ just because that's what I could afford.
Yeah.
And but the race, you were asking about the racing, and the racing, you could race 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Saturday, Sunday, night motocross. You had Ascot, you had OCIR, you had. There were a lot of tracks. There were a lot of. Ascot is downtown.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was all over the place. And like I say, I'd go now and I go, okay, gee, the hills in Laguna Beach, people rode all over. All the hiking and mountain bike trails that are in Laguna were motorcycle trails.
Yeah.
So it was a lot more wide open than I was even aware of. But again, there were places to race and whatnot. But interesting story. So I'm there as a freshman, and I hooked up with a couple guys that were interested in motorcycles too, and we went out to Irwindale Raceway.
Yeah.
Okay, and Irwindale Raceway was right by the Budweiser Brewery and whatnot. Anyway, it was one of these night where they do roundy round, cars and whatnot. And anyway, they had night motocross. So I remember going to watch whatever night it was, and I'm watching Jeff Ward race.
Little 73. He'd been
73.
Little guy, right?
He was a little guy,
okay.
Right?
And you raced in Hawaii.
Okay, yeah.
You started racing over there?
Yeah, so I raced in Hawaii, and they had 2 classes in Hawaii, amateur and expert. I raced, I think, 5 or 6 amateur races.
And you were expert.
And I was an expert.
I'm a
right?
pro.
I'm an expert, right? So I come over to Southern California going, I'm an expert, right? And I go to Irwindale Raceway, and I watch Jeff Ward, and I just went,
I'm not an expert.
I couldn't see myself going back to beginner class because I just couldn't see. So I went literally from expert to novice in about 15 seconds of watching that guy.
Was he on an XR75?
He's some mini bike thing that I don't even. Anyway, it was so humbling, And anyway, so that
Wardy's been a freak of nature from just day one. That guy is unreal.
Yeah. So anyway, I had visions of. I didn't want to be a mechanic. I didn't want to be a tuner. I want to be a racer.
Sure.
I want to be the fast guy,
yeah.
right? And I wasn't the fast guy.
Yeah, that's got to be a perspective changer because you didn't probably see any racing in Central Cal before you left.
No, there wasn't any.
Yeah, right.
That I was aware of.
So all you really knew was that, in
Yeah,
Hawaii.
I knew Hawaii, and like I said, I was
top dog.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I thought I was something, Yeah, I was just.
So as you're going to school there, did it kind of come into focus what you wanted to do or not really? You were still kind of like something in the motorcycle world, but you're not sure what.
No, well, through college, so I have a degree in mechanical engineering, right? And I would go back and work Christmas. I'd get back. It was a 2-week vacation, and I would work for 2 weeks.
In Hawaii?
In Hawaii, yeah. Okay. I'd work 6 days a week, and I'd go to the track on Sunday. And then in summertime, I would work every single day from the day that I would get there to the day I would leave. From my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, I ended up being the highest paid mechanic in the state.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I was very successful at being mechanic, and they'd actually save up motorcycles. I actually worked at this one place that I really loved working at called TLC Motorcycles, and it was a salvage yard. The military guys would come in off of they would pay them when they get off the boat, right? So they'd end up with a wad of cash. They would go right down to Kawasaki and this and that, whatever. They would buy H1s, H2s, Z1s, the biggest, fastest, and they're beginner motorcycle riders. And we would go, well, that motorcycle's coming back. And sure enough, they would wad the things,
right?
Within a couple of weeks. Well, TLC Motorcycles, a salvage yard, they would get these brand new motorcycles, and they would part them out for 50% of what.
Oh, so you guys were buying the parts and rebuilding and.
Yeah, well, but the guy that owned the TLC would buy the motorcycle for $50, $100 or whatever, and then part the thing out. He made his money back in it. And it was just this big tin barn filled with piles of motorcycles.
Jeez.
Like literally piles. And he knew where everything was. The dude dealt in cash. Okay, because you either had cash or check, but you dealt in cash.
Yeah.
He lived in the biggest house in Hawaii Kai.
Oh, he's killing it, huh?
Yeah, he's killing it, And he actually offered me a partnership when I done with my 5 years of college. But I went, no, I want to do the moto thing, But anyway, yeah, so how I kind of developed my interests. So, I was working part-time in, I was going back to Hawaii. But then when I was done, with school, it was like, okay, what do I do? So I came back just like I was going to come to school, but I went to work for Triumph Suzuki Pomona. Okay. And I was doing that Paul Thede porting, PTP, kind of thing. So it was kind of just making a living to be able to, because every Sunday I was racing.
Right.
And I was racing CMC, which was Saddleback Carlsbad, Saddleback Carlsbad, Saddleback Carlsbad, Golden State Series, and then, whatever the fall series was or winter series was, anyway. And so I would do that, and so it wasn't, I think that at some point in time, I could have probably earlier realized that I was never going to be fast enough to,
It's a hard pill to swallow.
But it was it was just my passion in life, you know, and it was my entire life was focused around
on Sunday,
you know, and
those local races. What do you think you got? What do you think you had for turnout? 500-600 people? I mean, they were big.
Oh yeah, no, it was big. It was big, and again, I didn't have any perspective other than Hawaii.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like I soon realized it's like there's not as many motorcycle riders as in Southern California and Hawaii. You know, but yeah, and it was all the guys too. It's like everybody. You know, it's like you had the Ricky Johnsons, you had Jeff Ward and you know, Johnny O'Mara, and just on and on and on, and all of those guys would. And so I would race with those guys. So I eventually became pro, and I would race with those guys, and I would do okay against them, but I never was fast enough or could afford to do any kind of nationals or something like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's just it's still this way. There's guys who are great riders, but to get to where you're going to get a ride and can actually make a living, it's like that's a tough little gap to bridge.
It's really tough, and it's one of the things that I talk to my guys and people that come to spectate the sport and whatnot. You know, you go to Supercross, right, and there are people working to get into the night show, and then they're from the night show to get into the main. You know, and I said, you don't realize these guys that are working to get into the night show are freaking heroes.
Yeah.
In where they grew up.
Yeah.
They are heroes. They are the best of the best. You have no perspective on how, you know.
It's upsetting when if you're ever sitting in the stands at a race and a guy in the LCQ, maybe he's running 5th, 6th, doesn't quite make it. That guy sucks. And you're like,
you have no idea.
Okay,
you
guy.
have no idea.
Keep sipping on your Budweiser. You have no idea what you're talking about. All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, and it was kind of one of those things where I, you know, then, you know, in racing, I injured myself. My first injury was my knee, and I think it was 81 or something like that. I was out at De Anza Cycle Park, and I say it wasn't that I was racing, it was I was crashing. That was a problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's not when you're going, it's how you stop, right? And so my bars crossed, and as the bike flipped, it caught my lower leg, and the bike turned sideways and just ripped all the ligaments off the bone, right? And this was back in the day where they just fillet you. You know, I've got scars that long on the inside and outside of my left knee. And so that was kind of the end of the, you know, and I'm like rehabbing and whatnot. Actually, that was an interesting story too, because the doctor tells me, it's like, oh, you might get 80% back. And I went, screw that, right? And I said, they normally kept you in a cast for over a year.
Yeah.
And 2 months, they take me out of the cast and going to put me in a splint, and my knee was bigger than my thigh.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sitting there going, this is just unacceptable, right? And I said, can I work it out? And he says, it's your leg. You can do whatever you want. And so I started going to the gym, and I started doing leg lifts and static wall squats. I ended up doing static wall squats over 12 minutes.
Oh, wow.
12 and a half minutes was a static wall squat. And like no cheating, whatever. What I would do is I would do like stuff for my forearms to take my mind off of, you know, this.
Yeah.
But I got back like 125% of what I had instead of 80, you know, getting back 80%. And so my doctor actually started going to orthopedic surgeon conventions and talking about my knee. And so
you were the model student.
Well, you know, I don't know how much of an effect I had. I can't take all the credit, you know, but certainly I had an effect on. I mean, now you go and get knee surgery. Well, I mean, it's all arthroscopic and, you know, whatever they can. But, they've got you moving the knee while you're still unconscious, you know. And so
you were a case study, probably for sure.
I was for sure. I had a positive effect on that. So,
how is it now? Is that knee still good?
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't have full range of motion. I have full strength, but didn't have full range of motion. And I'm in Disneyland with my family, and there was friends, and they had a trampoline. And I go, you know, I haven't done a backflip in a long time, because I did gymnastics when I was in college, you know, just intramural kind of stuff, right? And I haven't done a backflip on a trampoline. It's so much fun, right? And it was a little trampoline, and it was on a hillside, and it's getting dark. And I decided I'm going to do this back. You know, it's kind of like doing a double, right? Yeah. It's like, I'm going to do it, right? Anyway, I kind of I landed on my knees.
Oh.
And so my knees went like that, and it popped. It went pow, right? And I went, oh my God, I'm so screwed, But, and in fact, we went to Disneyland, and I was in a wheelchair, so we got to go to the front of the line. I was good. I think it was a good,
Yeah,
we worked out good. But anyway,
you break through the scar tissue?
I have full range of motion now.
Oh my gosh.
So I don't think that he's going to do that as part of the case study, but yeah, I have full range of motion and good.
Well, I've got a loss of range of motion here. Maybe I should just
do a backflip and land
get
on
good
your
and
knees.
drunk and just drop down onto my
Bam. Bam. Here, let me take care of that for you.
Seems like a terrible way to do it.
Yeah, well,
So during that window, were you, because I know you were either like a Saddleback guy, Saddleback Carlsbad guy, or an Indian Dunes guy. You were South. You were the
Saddleback Carlsbad.
Okay.
Saddleback Carlsbad. Like every other. And it's interesting because I'll be very frank with you. As I developed as a company, in some circles, I got insanely good reputation for setting up suspension. And that would be Saddleback and Carlsbad. And interesting, as far as the settings are concerned, there was, and I'll kind of jump a little bit, and hopefully we'll get back to where you want it. But I realized the effect of, say, rebound damping, and it turns out that if you want better grip, less rebound damping in general is better than more rebound damping, meaning quicker is better than slower. And I tested that out on a 1981 RM 125 with a 4-click rebound adjuster at the high school track at Saddleback, right? And I mean, the slowest setting was just spinning all over the place, and the quickest setting was wheeling. And so I actually created some settings that worked really, really well. And the thing about it, too, is that you can actually get used to the feeling of a very loose suspension if you know what you're doing. And if you realize that the benefit is the grip, it's kind of like Gary Denton. You know Gary.
I know who he is. Yep.
And Gary was whole shot master, and he would be night racer extraordinaire. He would be the guy they'd have the bounty nights and et cetera on, right? He ran 4 to 5 psi in his rear tire.
What? How would he get away with that without flatting?
He learned to float the bike.
Huh.
He learned.
So he just adapted to that to get himself
because the whole shot was the thing, and it's like what 5 lap, 6 lap race or something. The whole shot's the most important thing. He would get used to it, and so I could set up his bike suspension wise softer and quicker than anybody else's. And he would do just fine with it. He would learn to, there are some guys that they hit every bump twice, right?
Right.
And he would float the thing and not get flat. So, but anyway, I don't know exactly why I was going there, but.
Well, we were talking about you got really good reputation for setting bikes up and Saddleback.
Yeah, well, and what I was saying is that it also, those settings did not work for
Indian Dunes or
a lot of the other track, Indian Dunes or Florida or whatever. A lot of places in the country didn't work, and so as actually I was developing settings, really really good reputation, really lousy reputation, and in fact, the number of people that are have been race tech haters that we've as we go through the story, I'll tell you more. We've had to kind of overcome the kind of lousy reputation that I had created by my kind of original way to set up suspension.
Okay. Well, interesting. That'll come back in, I'm sure. So when did you launch? At what point did you actually launch Racetech?
So
and give me, kind of bridge the gap from here to there.
I'd had the partnership with ST Racing, and again, that didn't work out. They're, best intentions, very difficult to have a partnership work.
Yes.
And so I'd had that for 3 years, and I eventually just moved out. I went and had a CPA, and he just goes, "Hey, you're the business, and you're not locked into being in this partnership." So I had actually made arrangements and had some friends, and we moved everything out in one night. We were in one of these, 1,100 square foot kind of industrial areas, and I'd moved to the place in Pomona where I started Race Tech, and that was May of '84.
Okay.
So yeah, we're into our 41st
84,
year.
huh?
84. Yeah.
Okay.
But and so I started Race Tech in '84.
Okay.
And I called it Paul Thede's Race Tech because I wanted people to know where I was, because I'd created a reputation.
Right.
And it wasn't an ego thing. It was like, hey, here's where to find
Continued
me.
branding.
Yeah. And obviously
Gotcha.
we just call ourselves Race Tech at this point. So.
And then, when you were doing the ST, were you guys doing just suspension? Were you guys doing engines and stuff as well?
No, we were doing both.
So then with Race Tech, did you decide, okay, I'm just going to focus on suspension? Or
No, I did engines for a long time.
Okay.
Again, all two-stroke stuff, and that was that development kind of a thing. And it's funny. I built the dyno, engine dyno in college, and then didn't have the money to reproduce that.
Yeah.
And so I would work 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. We would do our testing in the parking lot, and our testing, the dyno was running up and down the parking lot, and you go, that's ridiculous. How could you possibly get a feel of horsepower, accelerating on a flat parking lot? We'd be doing it at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we'd be doing this is every day, and we built some, obviously I'm a little bit tainted on it, but we built some really good engines, and
that rudimentary stuff though was pretty common back then. I remember Damon Huffman told us a story. Not apples to apples, but his dad would build motors. Remember Damon Huffman's dad? Yeah. Little squirrely, but also sharp in his own way. He would have Damon on his block. He had like a starting line and a finish line, and he would say, this was on his Weisinger, right? Okay, when I drop my hand, you full throttle, and you don't let off till you get to here. And his dad would stopwatch it, and they would just make changes and have him run this run. And Damon goes, when I couldn't let off till I hit the line. And when I hit the line and let off, if I didn't just grab everything it had, I rolled out into an intersection. I'm like, oh,
so it became a stoppy master on
anyway,
a Weisinger.
There was a lot of that going on back then. It was a little rudimentary.
Yeah, well, you do what you got to do, right?
So at what point then did you guys go, okay, let's just focus on suspension?
I'm not really sure. It's probably in the 90s someplace.
Okay.
But it just basically I couldn't reliably provide the product that I wanted to produce. And again, had my hands so full with suspension that and it was interesting too, because if you look at improvement in lap times and rider enjoyment, et cetera, suspension's way easier to drop your lap times than horsepower ever is.
Way more. And I would say that's true today more so than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's like, it's funny, these guys will bring in 450s and they want them, built. And the number one thing, so Andrew is phenomenal at building engines, and we focus on power band as opposed to peak power. People make all kinds of stuff up about peak power. Peak power, frankly, the number of times you use that peak power number is so small. And really, you're going to ride a 450 at those RPM. They don't even handle well at those RPM.
No. Maybe Eli Tomac.
There's a few people on the planet, but the number one thing that people do is they go, hey, can we detune this a little bit, and we put them on pump gas, and they'd save some money, and and
I know it's kind of funny to watch guys, especially on a 450. 250, I get it. If you're racing competitively, you need some motor. But I tell guys, hey, what exhaust? And I'm like, just put a slip-on on it if you want. If you want, you know what I mean? You want to make it look cool. It's got more than you're going to ever need, bud.
Yeah, well, exhaust it could be different now, but numbers that I got, exhaust was the number one modification that people do on their bikes.
Currently?
Yeah, then seat covers, then handlebars,
graphics,
graphics kits, whatever. But yeah, And there's a lot more suspension being done these days. People realize
we're a very
that.
vain bunch. You know what I mean?
Well,
Just because it makes sense doesn't mean it matters.
well,
Yeah, I know the suspension would help me, but what about those titanium, levers?
nuts and bolts, and for sure. But
We're all guilty of it at times.
yeah, and that's okay. I mean, frankly, that's part of the fun of it. I mean, you look at the street end of it. We do street bikes, and we do Harleys, and we do road race, and we do supermoto, and we do everything.
Yeah.
But you look at the guys that are riding street bikes. What do? They go ride all together, and then they park, and they go and look at their motorcycles and talk about them.
That's right.
And Harley was brilliant. Frankly, they go, okay, we're not going to change this thing for forever. And then the aftermarket industry is so strong that how many different air filters can you get for a Harley?
I'm not real big into that world. I'm sure
No, but it's a gajillion.
Is it?
Well, they've been making the same thing for years and years,
Yeah, right,
So
right.
it's like, okay. And so having a super strong aftermarket is what really helps that brand. People don't buy Harleys because they're the fastest motorcycles, but they may be the most fun. And there's a lot of ways, for a street bike. I mean, for many people, they're the most fun. Part of that is, they ride them, and then part of it is they stand there and look at each other's bikes and go, oh, man, that's a cool air filter.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And I see guys doing that on dirt bikes all the time, too.
Same thing.
Whoa, you got titanium foot pegs.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
awesome. But
Yeah.
do you feel that weight savings, pal? I mean, no, you do not. Okay, so about 80 or, maybe early 90s, you kind of shift just onto suspension. I had asked you this earlier. Did you ever consider exhaust, or when did you dabble in that and go, okay, this is too?
I did. I don't remember exactly where it was, but again, I tried to forge a relationship with Bill's Pipes, and we did a teeny bit, but kind of internally there was some resistance to that. Okay. Meaning not my company, but at Bill's Pipes, and I've remained a good friend of Bill, for forever.
Sure.
But it just never happened, and I never wanted to. Again, my plate's full. My plate's always full. Frankly, it was my thought process to the greatest extent that kept my plate as full as it was. And I like to do stuff. I like to make stuff. I like to, and so, to go and build a pipe building shop didn't make a lot of sense to me. I didn't have the time to do it anyway. Right. So I had to, it was like, okay, who can I have build pipes for me? And so, I investigated it for a while and eventually went,
It's kind of hard in this industry. It seems like, I've never been in the business, making a widget but trying to partner with competitors, even if, you know what I mean? Like whether it's Bill's, Pro Circuit, Race Tech, FMF, everybody kind of wants to play their cards real tight to their chest. So it seems like it would be difficult to make alliances there. Am I wrong?
Yeah, sometimes more than others. I mean, one of the things, I have a tremendous amount of respect for literally everybody in the industry that's running a successful business. And frankly, I have a respect for people that have failed businesses. Our industry is filled with people that are enthusiasts. They're not formally educated in business, a lot of times not in engineering. It's like they just swung a leg over a mini bike at 10 years old and went, oh, this is it, and they just love it, and so it's like, okay, how can I make a living doing what I'm doing, and or doing what I love to do. And so it is not easy necessarily to make a living in this industry. But it's like I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mitch and Donnie and all the guys that are that are doing this. And so we're in many ways competitors, but I don't there's no energy negative that, at all.
What's interesting, this is getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but your generation, all those guys you just mentioned, you guys were there from really the start of the sport. And as you said, you guys built this whole thing, or you were there as it grew and built itself. And I think of like all the guys that hung around Mitch's shop, Jimmy Perry, Bones, Mike Hooker, name it, all those guys. Everybody has gone on to be successful. And I wonder if that same thing would happen today in this generation. Because you guys were very like you said, I'm working 7 days a week, 14-hour days.
Yeah.
I don't know that I see that as much.
It's pretty tough. With the advent of all the media and the, phones and the, iPads and on, it's so, instant gratification with all this stuff, and why do I need to do that? Why would I need to work that hard? I have a 22-year-old and I have twins that are 13. And I was a late starter.
Yes, you were.
Gate drops and they put the gate back up. The gate drops. I never let the clutch out.
Third drop you took off.
Okay, all right, now's my time. Anyway, but it's a real big concern because I was actually having a conversation with my daughter last night. She's into volleyball, and I was talking to her. Said that, the biggest thing that you can develop is a positive attitude. And it's not, you can't tell somebody, it's like, hey, go have a positive attitude. And I said, okay, so there'll be places where physically you're not as good, or maybe you don't have as much depth of knowledge in what you're doing, and you may not have been gifted to that. I said, but attitude gets you. So you have the determination, you have the attitude, it gets you. You want it badly enough, you will go study, you will go work out, you will go do whatever you need to do to be the person that you want to be. Now, if you don't have a picture of who you want to be,
right?
And if it's too easy to just be you the way that you are right now, why would you ever want to, so my oldest son's racing mountain bikes. I raced mountain bikes for 9 years, right, with him. And so he never had to, he would always have a conversation with me, I would say argue with me about that he's got to have the best, latest, specialized, this, that, whatever, which is another pound lighter than whatever. It's like, Dad, you wouldn't want me to lose the race and the, if I had that extra pound, Go take a poop, dude.
Dad, these derailleurs are 45 ounces lighter.
Yes, and
how do you expect me to race
auto
them?
shift? I'm going to gain a hundredth of a second.
Specialized is a sponsor of this show, so we appreciate your support.
There you go, and I spend plenty of money with Specialized. So, but I'm sitting there going, for you to be in your financial situation that you are in right now, where you don't have to struggle to survive. It's like, how many boxers come from, families that are doing well?
I know. Like, look at you can use our sport, Paul. I mean, Carmichael, Stewart, McGrath, Dungy, they all go on and on. They all come from blue collar, I'm not going to say poor, but like blue collar, hardworking families. Mm-hmm. Money was not abundant. Like a lot of them struggled to get those kids to the races. And I think that, the kids see how much is being invested and dedicated by the parents. They see that it's not easy. And that shows in their effort and their attitude. And I think I've spoiled my girls. I give them I feel like we're kind of, I'm tracking with what you're saying.
It's so easy to, because you love them and you go, okay, I don't want them to. I remember weeding the hillside and not really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
It's like, and if I could save my kids from doing it, but wait a second, how much did that actually help develop me into the person I am? I remember, you talk about not having money. I remember at Christmas, I wanted motocross boots. My parents couldn't afford motocross boots. I bought one boot, they bought the other.
No way, is that right?
Yeah, full bore. Yeah. Full bore boots, right, with the red, white, and blue stripes down the front. You may not remember that.
I know, I never had any, but I know I've seen pictures and know
before Scott's, right around the High Point era.
High Point was the
High Point boots,
those were the ones.
But full bore. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely an interesting topic, and there's a lot to it, but anyway, a little bit of a rabbit hole.
So anyway, like I said, I don't know how how it's going to play out, and I want to instill upon my kids that desire. I think that the gift that I got was passion for what I do, and whether it's passion on, building that engine dyno or building that first mini bike, or passion for racing, or passion for, building the best suspension or the best engine, or, 500 hours. It's like at some point in time I had to have realized this is not going to pay off. It's like, dude,
I'm only on one bike.
Yeah. I would foam the ports, I'd this is back in the 80s. I'd foam the ports. This is the heart and soul of a two-stroke is the transfer ports. I'd foam the ports, and then I'd shave and reshape, and I'd fill them with epoxy, and I'd plug them in there, and I did all kinds of.
Wow, yeah.
But to have the passion to do that, it's like I get into mountain bikes. I'm starting to race when I'm 59 years old or something, and it's like, that's not physically, it's not the most advantageous, but it's like, okay, do it. And then I'm doing 100 miles of mountain bike a week, and, et cetera, et cetera. I end up winning 4 state championships and two over the hump series. Yeah, it's not at the Jeff Ward, Johnny O'Mara level, but kind of the age group level, just below that. And
that's awesome.
And that's, you go, it's like, wait a second, my first mini bike, I don't have to pedal anymore, and then I am sitting there. The irony of pedaling did not escape me. I'm sitting there going, this is a brutal sport. What in the heck am I thinking?
You're spending time with your kid.
That is exactly what I was doing.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, the work ethic, the positive attitude, and the passion, right? I feel like that's it. And maybe all 3 of those are missing from a lot of kids today. Yeah. I don't see it as much. And I even with my children, I tell them, be passionate about something. I don't care what it is, but like, what are you passionate about? Because the other stuff we can work on. If you're passionate about it, you'll have the work ethic.
Yeah.
We can work on your attitude if it sucks, but let's find what you're passionate about.
Well,
that's easier said than done.
Yeah, and we can work on your attitude. The truth is about attitude is that when you realize that your attitude is a choice, as opposed to you being a victim of the circumstances around you. It's like whether it's the economy, or this person said this, or that person said that, or this person did this, or or they cut you off on the freeway or whatever. When you really realize that your attitude is your choice no matter what is going on, that's when you actually get some choice over it. And you get not just choice over, because that seems pretty obvious, but that's when, for me, life is completely different. And once you realize how much attitude affects your life, it's like, okay, so I can choose to be happy or pissed off. Really, that's a choice? No, you don't understand. This person did this. No. You can choose to be happy. Yeah, they did that no matter what. The number of people that have ripped Race Tech off and have copied products and settings and engines and mind-boggling. In fact, I was so pissed off at the industry, I was unconsciously trying to get out of the industry back in '91. I was ready to dump the industry, and I literally looked around for an industry that had integrity. Where
that's a long search.
I looked around and I went, it's the same everywhere.
Yeah,
and I don't care whether it's.
So was that a moment for you, where the
moment for me?
Switched?
Well, and it was. I don't think that I had a crappy attitude. I was always passionate about what I wanted to do, but what drove me, it's like I made the mistake, or I joke that I made the mistake, but it was actually a really good thing. I got straight A's my first quarter in college. I didn't want to go down from there. I ended up getting straight A's through my entire college. I graduated summa cum laude with straight A's in mechanical engineering. It's like, it wasn't because I was the most brilliant kid. It was because I worked my ass off. I would go to sleep at 2:00. I'd get up at 6:00 in the morning to go to the classes. I just worked. I outworked everybody else. There were other kids. I had roommates that they would do the same classes as me, and they'd go, "Oh yeah, I got it, yeah." And I go, "What the heck? How do you get that?" And I would just have to keep hammering at it until it kind of sunk into the thick head. And so it was that kind of persistence and attitude that really drove me. And that was a gift that if I could give to somebody else, I'd give it.
You know, and I'm a work in progress on this. Trust me, I'm not preaching, but like having some gratitude every day. Like I try to get up in the morning and go, God, thank you for just me being alive. There's people that are not waking up today, you know? You can always look around and find things to be grateful and be positive about. And
if you look,
and that's that perspective change. It's a life changer.
Yeah. Most of the world lives a completely, one of the things I say, well, that's a first world problem. That's a first world problem.
Totally.
It's like, it's, and I don't want to sit here, but the truth is that the more perspective that we can have, if nothing else happens in life, but realizing like, hey, I've got a lot to be grateful for no matter what is going on. I had one of my employees, I had a person that screwed up in shipping a whole bunch of time, cost us a lot of money, right? And I went back and talked to him, and the other employee that was a salesperson was mind-boggled that I didn't rip the person's head off. But what I need to do is have a conversation with the shipper and say, okay, let's figure it out. Okay, do you not understand what's going on? Are you incapable of doing this? Because the truth is some people are incapable. Are you incapable of doing this? Meaning, have we not trained you well? Or you just, this isn't your thing and we need to find another place for you? Or do you not care? If you don't care, then you need to find another job.
Yeah. If
you do care, we need to see if this is something that you're capable of doing. If you're not capable of doing, let's move it someplace else. Let somebody else do it.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a decision, and it's not like, but if the person basically I got from them is like, oh, well, I don't really give a shit about this, place, then it's like, okay, move on, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and if you don't, that's whatever. That's up to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You ever see that Jocko Willink clip where he says, it's called Good. Anytime he's presented with a problem, he goes, good. You can always find a way to spin it. Like, oh, we didn't get this. Oh, good. It gives us more opportunity to be ready. Or, didn't get this job. Good. More time to study for the next one. And
I have. Yeah,
it is so great. It's phenomenal.
No, I've not had. But one of the things that I do tell my kids, I go, people a lot of times get pissed off that we've got problems. And I say, the only reason people ever get paid is their ability to solve problems.
Yeah. And
I'm talking whether it's, supplying sodas or whether it's entertainment. Entertainment, people have what's their problem? Their problem is they want to be entertained. They're bored, they're this, they're that, whatever. It's like your ability to solve problems is what makes you money. The bigger the problem that you solve.
I've never heard it put like that.
The more money you make. Yeah, the more money you make. And so it's like, okay, find where you can be of service or be of value to people. And are there going to be people that copycat you, that rip you off, that this or that, whatever? Yeah, there are. Am I thrilled about that? No. But what's your choice? What are you going to do?
This philosophy lesson is brought to you by. Listen, I'm loving this. We're going to get more into race tech here and some of the other. I've got a lot more questions to get to. We're going to take a quick break. This is your Troy Lee Designs timeout. Stick around, guys. We'll be back here with more Paul Thede.
Dunlop. There is a reason every AMA championship in the past decade was won on Dunlop tires. They are the best. Choose the best performing tire and a brand that has never wavered in their support of our sport. Choose Dunlop. Pro Circuit. Pro Circuit products are designed with one goal in mind: winning. Through passion and hard work, Pro Circuit has operated the most successful 250 team in the history of the sport. They use that same formula when developing exhaust, engine, and suspension parts for every brand. When only the highest level of performance is acceptable, trust Pro Circuit.
Seat Concepts prides themselves in offering the best seat foam and cover products available for off-road, moto, dual sport, adventure, quad, and street motorcycles, all at affordable prices. So whether you're looking for better performance or more comfort, choose a superior American-made product from Seat Concepts.
Something from nothing. That's what Nihilo Concepts is about. It starts with a spark, an idea, a concept, which leads to a design, and finishes with engineered excellence with the highest quality products created with durability in mind. All our products are made in the USA at our state-of-the-art facility in Stuart, Florida. Whether you are a weekend warrior, ride for fun, or at the highest level of competition, Nihilo Concepts offers innovative titanium, aluminum, and carbon fiber parts for your dirt bike. We offer a wide variety of products that you can customize to your liking. Browse our site for foot pegs, brake tips, engine components, specialty tools, frame grip tape, lever grips, carbon fiber components, motor stands, our secondary on-switch, plus much more. Head to NihiloConcepts.com and see for yourself why factory teams like Red Bull KTM, Rockstar Husqvarna, Troy Lee Designs Gas, Orange Brigade, Club MX, KLM Gas, and some of the fastest riders in the world choose Nihilo Concepts.
Welcome back. That was our Troy Lee Designs timeout. If you guys haven't been over to TLD, go check them out. Helmet paint, motocross gear, mountain bike gear, all kinds of cool stuff. The SE5 helmet, amazing. Troy makes stuff look fast. He makes incredible safety products. We're stoked to have those guys on board. So check out Troy Lee Designs. Okay, so jumping back in here after our philosophical rabbit hole, take us through the growth of Racetech. Like, was there a point where you guys really spiked, or was it just sort of a steady curve from the get-go?
You know, it actually, frankly, I didn't pay that much attention.
Okay.
No, I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
I can certainly talk about some milestones that happened, but you know, again, I was working 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I was just had my head down all the time. I was just, busy. As long as I could pay my bills and my employees and that kind of stuff, I was just working it.
Do you attribute that to some of your success? I mean, rather than being so focused, like I think you could say this as a racer too, is like rather than looking at, okay, the championship, just day at a time, do your work, do the motos, focus on first downs instead of touchdowns.
Yeah, I would certainly say that. Again, the working 120 hours a week is not something I would wish on anybody, but again, it's kind of part of that development of who I was. And actually, if you want to, we were talking about a little bit of the philosophical end of it. I went off into a little journey of personal growth back in 91. But it was just a friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, I got this stuff that I think you'd be interested in," and I went, "Okay, I'll check it out." I went to a presentation and I kind of went, "Well, this is good," but and it was basically the concept behind personal growth is that most of our decisions are made unconsciously. So we get programmed at a very early age, and then once we're programmed, then literally the rest of our life, all we do is prove ourselves right about our opinions.
So it's like you're downloading software into your brain as a kid, and then once it's in, that's your software. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So, for example, let's say that you didn't have parents that were into teaching math or whatever, or for whatever reason, you're in first grade or whatever, or kindergarten even, and you go, gee, this math stuff is too difficult for me. I'm no good in math. That would be a decision that you would make that becomes an unconscious thought process that says, I'm no good in math. Then you don't look forward to the new math, tests coming up. You don't look forward to the math portion of class. And in every single test you take, you get a lousy grade in math. Because that's the only thing you can do is be right about it.
That's literally me. You just described me.
Yeah, well,
I hate math.
Yeah, well, and so it's exactly it. And you go, I'm no good at math, and I hate math. I mean, David, you're a smart guy. So it's just the truth is, and there are some people that their brains go like this. Absolutely, I'm not going to say that everybody's all the same, but basically, I mean, my son Brandon, my oldest, he had a friend of his that, he seemed like a pretty sharp kid, but he was like a cut up. He was he was the cool kid, and he was lousy in math, like lousy. And I talked to my son about kind of why we do this, and he comes to me. He says, "Dad, would you mind tutoring, my friend in math?" And I'm going, that's a little bit too bonkers, son. It's like I'd be surprised if he were open to it. And basically he came in, and I said, okay, and so he comes to me, and and it was surprising to me that he would even be open to it, but I think he realized at some point in time that there was value in him doing that. And I basically talked to him about this whole concept of we decide things about ourselves, and then we're just right about them for the rest of our life. And so I told him my experience of him. I said, the problem with math is math builds on math. So if you miss this, you're not going to get this. And if you miss this, and at some point in time it branches, but if you don't have a really good foundation of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and parentheses, and how the order of the functions go, it's like you're not going to get here, and you'll just go, okay, I'm gonna do this something else besides that. And so, but that's the truth about everything. We decide, who we're going to hang out with, who our girlfriend's going to be, what we deserve, what we don't deserve. I know racers, they'll look at the entry list and decide what place they're going to finish before they,
we see that every year,
all the time.
Yeah,
all the time. It's funny because I can segue into a lot of different stuff here, but I'm teaching seminars, and we talked about starts, and I said it's relatively easy to get good at starts. And one of the guys that was in the seminar looks at me and kind of goes, you're whacked. It's like, and I go, no. So I've been around Gary Denton, Doug Dubach. Mm-hmm. We've got Alessi, and then we've got Vince Freese, all of my guys, right? I do not take credit for them and their skills. Dubach, this is a funny story, and I hope he doesn't mind me telling it at all, but so he's struggling a bit with starts, and he's at NMA race in Vegas, and watching the gate drop, timing it, from when the thing goes sideways and whatever. Well, they switched the person pulling the lever, and so he, in one of these 4-lap races, gets a last place start out of 40 guys, blazes through those guys, and finishes like second or something in a 4-lap race. I mean, he's so much faster than those guys. It's just nuts, right? And he comes back in, and I would go to the races with him, and I used to videotape him, and et cetera. And I went, hey, great race, but what the heck was the deal with that start, right? And he came back and he says, well, I kick your ass, and I go, I beat you to the first turn, and so but basically what we did is we hooked up Dubach with Denton. Okay. And I asked Denton, I said, hey, because Denton was master of the starts, right? And I said, can you help Doug out. And we were all, it's kind of this group of him and Beyer and and those guys and Denton wrote up a 4-page handwritten thing, which I still have, on starts. 4 pages. Okay. And so basically what he did is he taught Dubach how to start. Dubach actually did most of the heavy lifting with Joe Melton. Joe Melton was is a good friend of his, and basically they would go out and practice starts, different conditions, ruts, not this, that, whatever, and he would practice starts all the time. And so when I said, in the seminar, I go, it's relatively easy to get good at starts. So I go, how often do you practice starts? People go, I practice starts all the time. Well, okay, what you do is you practice a start every time you do in a moto, meaning, your practice motos, and you might do a session where you do 2, 3, 4 starts, right? But I said, what's the most important 6 seconds of the race?
It's the start, yeah.
Nobody ever argues. Nobody ever goes, well, the last 6 seconds of the first 6 seconds are the most important of the race, the start, right? And I go, so how much do you practice it? And when the reality of it is not much.
As a percentage.
Yeah, not much.
Fraction of a percent.
And so, but here's also the second part of it. It's my firm belief that when you're sitting in the starting line, at no matter what the level is, you're only really competing for the whole shot with maybe 4 or 5 guys. Not because their bikes are faster, their skill set or whatever, but most of the guys sitting on the starting line do not want the start. They don't want to be first into the first turn. Okay, now just think about this for a second. It's like, okay, so if you get the start and you fade backwards versus get a lousy start and work your way forward, which one's better?
Well, you have less to lose if you get a bad start and come forward, right? I got a bad start.
But ran out of time.
Yeah, if you go backwards, it's a bad look.
Dude, you were smoking. Man, if only you had more time.
Yeah.
But if you're starting first and then what's the label for a guy that works his way backwards?
A fader.
You're a fader.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're a fader. So most people, they would love to be about 5th. You're really not competing against a lot of guys that really want to get the whole shot.
That's interesting.
Okay, most, and maybe it's 6 or 7 guys at the highest level.
Yeah.
At the highest level. But most of the guys don't want. So you got that. So that's a psychological thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then obviously you've got the skill set of being able to actually know what to do. But I don't know why exactly we got onto that.
We're talking about Dr. D working on starts. I don't know either how we got there.
Yeah. Anyway, there's something with the kind of the philosophy and psychology of it all. Oh, I know. I was introduced to
math.
Personal growth.
Yeah.
Well, personal growth class, and the idea behind personal growth is we get these thought processes in our head. And, we decide, whether we deserve such and such a relationship or whatever. And sometimes it's the model we have of our parents, or, it's like, hey, if you come from a broken home, it's a struggle to not have that in the back of your head.
Yeah.
That, and it's like, I'm not saying, hey, people need to stay married for the rest of their lives. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that you've got these patterns that you have unconsciously in your head. The studies show that most of our thought processes are in place by the age of 8. Wow. Once we get a thought process, I'm no good in math, you are only going to prove yourself right for the rest of your life.
Mm. That's interesting. I think there's some, I totally believe what you're saying. I would say there's some influences that certainly past that point
absolutely
continue to program.
Absolutely.
I never had a good math teacher. Mm-hmm. I never liked any of my math teachers. They didn't speak to me the right way, right?
Yeah, no value to it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I just felt like they weren't speaking my language. I had an English teacher who was super squirrely and goofy, and he really encouraged us to just kind of open our mind and write whatever you want. And I learned to love English and writing.
Yeah.
And went on to,
and
work in journalism, right? Those are the kind of
Yeah.
things I'm talking about where
Yeah.
my sister and I both, obviously, we come from a broken home. Both good, loving parents, but they've split up.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I both have married people with super strong family values.
Mm-hmm.
So even that experience, which, I don't remember or feel like there's a bunch of trauma to it, it still have impacted me, I think both of us enough that when we looked for a partner, it was like someone with a really solid marriage base.
And if the thing is that when those decisions that we make are completely unconscious, then it's choosing where our life goes. When you make a conscious decision that says, okay, and sometimes we do it as a combination of both. A lot of times we'll sit there and go, okay, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to gather information, but you still make the same decision that you were already programmed to do, But I was talking about that kid that was a friend of my son's. He went on to be very, very good in math, and I literally tutored him once, and it was really more about the thought process behind. And math builds on math, dude.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, my experience of you're very smart. You just got to get the building blocks, and you got to want it. That's all.
And maybe you were speaking the language he needed to hear, right? And other math teachers
maybe
were.
that was it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But and again, I didn't really talk too much about. I talked about the value of math. It's like my kids go, "Why do you want me to get an A?" Because I want you to practice being great. I want you to practice being as good as you can be. I want you to practice excellence, because excellence is a habit. It's not. It's not, it's something that was just something that was given to you. It's like, and the more that you create that habit in any area, the more it translates into the rest of the areas. So anyway, I actually was telling you, I was really done with the industry back in '91. I was just toast on it. The more that I would get notoriety, the more people would copy me. And there were companies out there that would send their stuff in at the beginning of every season, and then they'd take the stuff apart and they'd copy it. So I did the personal growth class, and I just went, oh my God! It was 4-day class, right? Sat through 3 out of the 4 days, just going, this is really good stuff. My friends could really use this. It's like I am so arrived, kind of thing, and just. And that was my MO. I was pretty self-righteous back then. As I look back, and I'm a lot more humble today than I was, back then. But anyway, we did an exercise. It was finally like, oh my God, they've been talking to me this whole time. And so I kind of went down a personal growth journey. But in the industry, I got a pretty bad reputation.
Of being what?
In a cult,
Really?
Yeah, just. Oh. Certain portions of it, it's like McGrath's dad would give me shit every single time he would see me, it's like, and I'm just sitting going like, oh God, anyway, but the point is that what I did is I saw, so here's Doug, and again, Doug is a phenomenal guy, phenomenal writer, phenomenal person, great work ethic, super talented in everything he does, very, very smart too. When he was getting last place starts, he'd work his way up to 8th or 9th or something like that. When he was getting first place starts, he'd work his way back to 13th.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there was a period of time where I think he probably whole shot 50% of the races.
Oh yeah.
At Supercross,
he became a whole shot man.
He was the guy, right? And so it's like you go, okay, so what's going on? Well, the answer is obvious. It's not his skill set, it's mental. So if it's mental, what I wanted to do is to be able to go, okay, hey, here's something, and the problem with kind of presenting, a personal growth thing to people is a lot of times they go, oh, why are you talking to me about this? You think I'm messed up. You think I'm screwed up, and you think there's something wrong with me, and you want to fit. And so it actually had a negative effect on some of my relationships, which is kind of unfortunate, But my intention was to really help the people. It's like for them to be whatever they get out of it. If they can learn something that it benefits their life, fantastic. You know? But anyway, during that period in there too, I kind of looked in my own life and I go, well, I told you I looked around for an industry that was, integrity. You look in the personal growth industry or religion or whatever. It's like, how many times is it? Well, I know the right stuff. I'm the only guy that knows. You're wrong. And then what they do is they'll steal stuff from the. It's like, and you just sit there and go, God dang. It's like, so what I did is I stepped back and I realized it's like what I really, really, really love is I love motorcycles and I love this industry and I love racing and I love the people that are in the racing, and this is so what I need to do is I need to do it differently than it's ever been done before. And if I'm really frank about how most people get started in either engines or suspension, it really is taking other people's stuff apart and copying it. That's all they do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way the world works.
That's the way the world works. Yeah. Go on Temu, folks. It's like, yeah, right. Dude. But anyway, I said, okay, I'm willing to risk it all. And my wife and another friend of mine said, have you ever thought about teaching the secrets? And so this is getting into doing the seminars, and I went, that seems crazy. Let me ask my friends, they all said, that's stupid. It's like, so I,
so I did it.
Did a little ad in Cycle. What do they know? It's like little ad in Cycle News. You remember Cycle News, right? Yeah. And I did a little ad in Cycle News and I had 50 people there. I had engineer from Chrysler Corporation sitting in the first row.
You're kidding me.
No, I had engineers from NASA, engineers from pretty much every major manufacturer at this point in time that we've had in there. But I think you're probably going to be talking about this at some point in time. But we've done over 180 seminars around the world. Anyway. So they're sitting there
in these seminars. You're just talking about suspension, valving setup, theory, all of it.
All of it, and I'm telling some stories, and I'm, it's 2-day theory class, 2-day shop skills, 2-day advanced, 1 day. We changed it around. Right now it's on dynos. Rob actually teaches that one, Rob Brown. And then we've got a 2-day engine seminar as well, which I don't teach the engine seminar. Andrew does. Yeah. But Wyatt Scott, who's, kind of my right-hand service guy, phenomenal technician, does most of the teaching of the shop skills class, as well. So, but yeah, we talk about the number of misconceptions in whether it's engines or whether it's suspension. Old wives' tales, not to be derogatory to old wives, but you get the the thought. It's like the number of misconceptions there are out there is pretty bonkers. But like I said, I decided to do it differently and teach what I know.
Yeah, teach the secrets instead of trying to hide them. And
along with that, I created the gold valve, which the gold valve is kind of, hey, this is suspension valving in a box. It's like we can set this thing up any way you want to set it up or any way we want to set it up. And as long as I can give you a correct setting and you can install it properly, now we've got a way that that you can do this in your garage if you want to, if you have the inclination to do it or whatever. And it's also something that, allowed me to go international. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, we can go back to wherever you want to go on this, but I.
No, it was interesting. And one of my questions about your, about the seminars. So that's perfect. And it's interesting, when you say, I just need to find a way to do it differently then, and, we talk about you're looking for this industry that's above reproach. And I got into the fire service thinking like, okay, these guys, this is
all fighting fires and saving lives.
It's just nothing but good dudes. And you get in it and you realize, oh, they have problems here just like anywhere else. Now, I love the mission and the job, and it's great. And it's just like motocross. I love motocross. I love the people. I love the sport. But there's turds everywhere you go. And so Put a smile on your face and
and
kick the turds out of the way.
And you can't change them.
No,
So, yep.
Talk a little bit about some of the bigger milestones in suspension technology and development. I mean, obviously there's going from twin shock to single shock, and there's, in your opinion, over the years from 70s to modern day, what were some of the bigger advancements?
Well, the first thing, of course, was long travel. Like I was saying, I started off with no suspension, kind of like your mountain bike, thing where you go, oh my gosh, it moves that far, I'm in heaven, But the first real thing was increase in travel, and so really, really, really rapid development for probably 10 or 15 years. Starting in the mid-'70s with the Yamaha monoshock, that was a no rise in rate as far as leverage ratio is concerned. Very, very flat. Pretty crude damper, although at the time it was sophisticated. That was the one with the big, bulb at the end with and large diameter shaft and high pressures and one rate spring. And what you did to change the spring rate was change the nitrogen pressure. The problem with that kind of high pressure, which it was, in excess of 250 to 350 PSI, the greater the pressure, and the problem with air suspension anyway is the greater the pressure, the more seal drag. Mm-hmm. So the more seal drag, the more breakaway friction, the more you feel the harshness. It's just a different feel with air stuff as opposed to spring stuff. And the spring stuff does have a component of that where you've got drag that you can't get away from, but it's that kind of stuff, improves incrementally, as opposed to at that point in time, it was like, okay, wow, long travel. And then it was, okay, Yamaha's got the monoshock, what do we do? Mm-hmm. Then it's dual shocks, then you move them up and you lay them down and you this and the that and the whatever. And then there was all kinds of stuff, baloney stuff about, the shock needs to be pointed at the backbone and the steering. All that stuff's baloney. Yeah. But it's basically rise and rate, and what your rigidity is, and et cetera, et cetera. So, back in the 70s, mid 70s to mid 80s, it was laying shocks down and long travel, and then it was like, okay, front travel getting longer. Very quickly, they came up to around 300 millimeters or 12 inches of travel. Some people experiment with a little bit more, but then you higher center of gravities.
Yeah. Some of those Makos.
The Makos in particular, 15 inches of travel.
I couldn't even touch the ground on those things. My feet are dangling. I could do the vintage stuff. Yeah. Now I'm like, you had to be a monster to ride these things.
Well, some of those guys, you remember in the olden days too, it's like you had the tall guys and they had seats that were this tall. You just go. But, and so it kind of the length of travel really settled in by the mid-'80s. And even earlier, a little bit earlier than that, to around 300 millimeters of travel.
That was kind of the sweet spot.
Kind of the sweet spot, and it really hasn't changed that much since then. So quite a number of years. Then what happened is we started getting into, it was still damping rod forks. There were still some iterations of damping rod forks, which damping rod forks is just shoving oil through a hole. And it's what we call orifice-style damping, which an orifice is just a hole, whether it's round or square or a slot or whatever. But basically, it has a velocity squared function. So you double the velocity, you have 4 times the force. So it has a tendency to be mushy and harsh. So worst of both worlds. How do you make it mushy and harsh? Shove oil through holes, and then you could make the hole smaller, then it would be harsher, a little less mushy. You make the hole bigger, it was more mushy and not as harsh, and so that was kind of the damping rods thing, and they started to work with what they called linear valves, but they'd stuff a little valve in the bottom of the damping rod, and it was, from my perspective, wrong rate, wrong volumes available, et cetera, but the idea was, instead of to create a damping curve that looked like this, so this is velocity, this is force. Okay. So basically, instead of going like this, to go, okay, let's go more like this instead of like this. So how can we make it firmer down here, less harsh up here?
Right.
And obviously, the what we've got is with motocross and dirt bikes, you've got situations where you've got bigger bumps and bigger jumps than there is travel. So if all your bumps were less than 6 inches or whatever, you wouldn't necessarily need the amount of travel, and to be as sophisticated in controlling the damping either. But and obviously the better suspension, the more speeds we got too. So it kind of one adds to the other. But basically, so manufacturers, got into that as they were starting to put linkages on. So basically you got, Kawasaki with the Unitrack, and you got Suzuki, of course, with the full floater, back in the 81, era and stuff like that.
I miss that, the Pro Link and the monocross. I wish those, I don't know, there's something cool about it to me. Maybe I'm just old, but.
Well, and it was a kind of thing too. I measured my first leverage ratio curve back in 1981, I think. Okay. And at that point in time, it's like I'm plotting it out and doing calculations and, et cetera. It's the very first leverage ratio curve I ever measured. I kind of held it up, looked at it, and went, "That's interesting." Didn't tell me anything.
How do you apply it?
How do you apply it, right? And then after I've done, 10 of them, then I start to see patterns of what's working and what's not working and why it doesn't work. It's like, oh, okay, this thing has a hook here on it, and this one, and this is, what percentage rise in rate is it? How steep is it? How much does it change? Because the real trick is you can be not progressive enough or too progressive. Now, the damping curve that I described to you of the velocity squared, overstyle damping, that's too progressive. It's not what most people want to hear. What they want to hear is, what am I going to do? I want my suspension to feel more progressive. So that means softer on the little bumps and stiffer on the big bumps. Well, what I will do is by making leverage ratio curve, damping curve more like this, I want to make it feel more progressive to you, because it'll actually be plusher on the little bumps that are square edge where I'm getting high velocities, because damping is sensitive to velocity. It doesn't care how big the bump. It cares somewhat how big the bump is, but only in how much velocity it creates.
Right. That's where you get high speed and low speed compression.
High speed and low speed compression, and high speed and low speed rebound really is forced by the spring only. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about anything else. It's just how much energy is stored in that spring, how deep into the travel you go. Then you get high speed, low speed on rebound. Right. But yeah, rebound is very important, but it's relatively easy in comparison with compression. Okay, so kind of back in 81 or so, we had full floater, and they had all this thing about the shocks being compressed by both sides. None of that matters. Okay, none of that matters at all. People, again, the shock got to be mounted here. The shock could be mounted sideways with some kind of squirrely linkage, as long as it didn't have slop in it and all flexy and too heavy. It doesn't matter whether the shock compressed this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. It doesn't make any difference at all.
Okay.
Just depends on what the force curves are at the rear wheel. Okay, and so Suzuki, then got sued by the guy that invented the full floater, and then they went, oh, gee, we got to do something different. The next version was, I think, 1986, which was an eccentric cam. That had so much stiction in it. So when I do race sag, I came up with, so if you measure sag, if you've ever measured sag before, it's like people go, okay, we'll get on the bike, bounce on it, and we'll measure it. And then you measure it again, and you go, oh, it's off 3 millimeters. And people will change that or chase that with preload adjusters. One of the reasons for that, there's 2 reasons for that, but one of the reasons for that is because there's something that I call the stiction zone. And so what I do is when I measure, I develop this as a method. It's like, okay, push down on it, let it come up real slowly. Have the rider stand on the pegs. Don't have them sit on the seat. Stand on the pegs. Why? Motocross bike, it's a really consistent measurement point. If you sit on the seat, some people go, oh, I'm going to get in an attack position. And they move all over the place. And if you just stand on the pegs, you're balancing. Nobody else is balancing you. You hold on to something else. You can hold the bike fairly still. Somebody pushes down on it, let it come up very, very slowly. Where it stops, you measure it. If there were no drag in that linkage, it would come up a little bit further. Then the next time, you pull up on it, let it come down very slowly. Where it stops, you measure it. The difference between those 2 measurements is what I call the stiction zone. And what I say is that the without stiction, it's going to be halfway in between.
Right.
Very, very consistent way.
So that's
to measure.
the number you.
That's the number.
Select. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
You know what? I've worked with guys when I raced professionally that did that exact same way. So,
like I said, I created that back in the early, probably back in the 80s sometime, because, people say, well, it's not the, wait a second, what method are you using? So I actually developed the method for doing it so it's consistent. But that tells us two things. One is what the actual sag is, and as linkages, if they have gotten better, and many of them when they're in really good shape, the stiction zone is down into 3 to 5 millimeter range, okay? If you do that, then your number, so when you just bounce on it, it's going to end up in that 3 millimeter range. Unless somebody's trying to chase a millimeter, you not using that method can be okay. The benefit of using that method is it gives you a clue as to how good that linkage or how bad that linkage is. The greater the difference between the two, the greater the stiction zone is, the worse it is. And what I teach in the seminars, I say, one of your jobs as a suspension tuner is to be a detective. You don't know whether it was a damping setting that made this bike not work properly, whether it was a spring rate that was off, whether it was friction. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to eliminate friction. And my joke in the seminar, which I always tell, is friction bad. And the students, and I go friction, and they go bad. But the point is that what your job as a detective is to figure out where your problem is. If you got a stiction issue and you go and chase damping or spring rate, you can chase damping and spring rate for the rest of your life and never find the problem, the source of the problem.
Yeah.
It's like we talk about, what are the biggest suspension setup issues? For most people on a front end, one of two things. Either the front forks are not put on properly, so they're either wedged in or splayed out, so it's wheels not installed right, friction bad, or you got too much preload. One of those two things screws up, and I would say probably 90% of all the suspension that's out there, period.
Wow.
Has got one of those two issues going on. You go and do the best suspension in the world, hand it to the customer puts it on his bike, and he doesn't know how to put the front end on. We've had magazine editors apologize, that, I've been screwing this stuff up for years. I told you I needed a change. All you did was straighten this out. And this wasn't to me. This was what Rob was testing with the guy, right? And the guy comes back and goes, I have been screwing up. I have been giving lousy reviews to I don't know how many people for at least 6-7 years.
Yeah, well, like the whole spin the wheel, grab the brake thing, or pull down on it. From what I've gathered, that is not really a great way to do it. Like the thing should settle naturally, right?
First of all, it needs to be free enough to move on its own. Okay, so the method of spinning the wheel and hitting the brake works fine. Taking the front wheel and pushing against the wall works fine. If you've got the axle typically goes from the right side and threads into the left side, all right? The right side has, you can clamp on it any place you want to. So you tighten this one down, you've got to make sure there aren't any burrs, nothing's dragging, somebody hasn't over-pinched it so that's grabbing too tightly. It's got to be able to be free on here, first of all. So that's a number one requirement. The second thing is what you can do is you can take and push that thing in a little bit, spin it, hit the brake, or push against the wall. If it comes to this spot, then you pull it out, spin it, do this. If it goes back to the same spot,
that's the happy place.
You're good to go.
You got to find its happy place.
Yeah, if it's not moving, it's too sticky in there, and you've got to basically make it to where it can find that spot. But the number of people that have burrs, the number of people that have bent axles, the number of people, especially in the vintage world, bent axles, because it used to be the axle was about that big a diameter. But anyway, it's actually surprising to me the number of people that I have taught the method of stiction zone and whatever. They sit there in a seminar and go like this, but then they go back to doing it their own way. It's like, okay, your choice. It's like I can't force people into doing this. And again, if your stiction zone is so small that, and you're not chasing 1 millimeter or something, it doesn't matter that much,
Yeah, and I think for a lot of folks, and I'm going to speak for the general population here of riders, local racers, the big group. It's like we need something simple. You start adding, the more steps you add, the more likely we are to go, I'll just run it, not even check the sag. And this comes from a guy who I know I should be checking sag frequently, and I'll be like, I'm just going to go ride today.
Well, no. So, but here's the thing. Sag doesn't change. Meaning once it's set, it's set. Okay. The only thing that changes once you've got it on there, unless the collars have loosened up or whatever, is when the suspension heats up, the pressure in the shock actually increases. And the pressure works over the cross-sectional area of the shaft and actually will decrease your sag a little bit. Okay. But when the temperature comes back down, it goes back to exactly where it was. So the thing is that if you're measuring at the same temperature of the suspension, if you're measuring the sag 2 or 3 times and it's different, that's your method. The spring is not changing. The springs are not sacking out. A spring in this day and age, so back in the early days, it was actually part of the issue that I had with my partners back when I was in ST racing. They would buy their son new fork springs every month because it was under the set, under the limit that Suzuki gave. It's like on his RM250. It's like, oh, these are too short. We need to get rid of these. It's like buy new ones. And when we make our springs, we pay extra to sack our springs out. Okay. It's a part of the process called setting the spring. Okay, so if you had a welding rod, right, and you had the welding rod on here and you just bent it, right, or bent it over the edge, right, and you kept pushing it down. You could push it down before it reaches its elastic limit. The elastic limit is once it hits that spot where it takes a set. Now the thing's set. Now it's got a bend in it. It's done. Same thing with a fork spring. But if you took it and bent it before that set, or before the elastic limit, you could bend it thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of cycles. It doesn't wear in. It doesn't wear out. It doesn't change. It doesn't change its rate. It doesn't change its length. You can hit that set length, you can hit that elastic limit one time, it's done. Okay, just like a shim. When a shim bends or permanently distorts, once it's bent past that elastic limit one time, it's done.
It's cooked, yeah.
Okay, so the springs, back when they were going to longer and longer travels, back in the early 80s and whatnot, they didn't have the metallurgy. They didn't have the materials, and so what was happening is springs would take a set. You can actually take springs that are set, so they're shorter. You can take them and throw them on the ground like, sideways 3-4 times. It'll grow 10 millimeters.
Is that right? So you're telling me if I set the sag, even with a new bike?
Brand new bike.
And I set it right, it will never change. I don't ever have to reset it.
Ever.
So then I've been doing sag wrong because I will get different numbers. I keep rechecking it.
Well, like I said, prove it to yourself. I never say, just do what I say. Try it out for yourself. And like I say, things that make it inconsistent. If you're sitting on the seat, we went out to a launch for a company that will remain nameless, and they were out there and we're riding the bikes and different weight riders, and they had put the screw adjustable where you can put a T handle on there and change the preload. And so they were basically setting up these bikes for every rider, and my guy that worked for me goes and he stands on the pegs, and the technician goes, "Oh, no. We don't do that method." It's like, we don't do that method. And so my guy goes, okay. So every time he would change it, he would sit in a little bit different position on the seat. Okay. And the numbers would come out different. And the technician he goes,
tightening, loosening.
Tightening. He goes, I don't know what's wrong with this thing. It's like, and the guy is just laughing. My guy was just laughing. because he, like I said, he just moved his butt back
Doesn't
and
take
forth.
much. Even rolling your shoulders forward or
It
back,
doesn't-
right?
Well, there's some people, oh, well, I'm getting in an attack position and, loading the front. No, just do something consistent. You can actually stand on the pegs, lock in with your knees, and move your body backwards or forward and screw up the sag too. So when you're standing on the pegs, you need to stand with all your weight on the pegs. Your knees aren't dragging. You're holding it yourself. It's not like, how you have somebody, they straddle the front fork or the front wheel and, you're leaning this way and he's pulling that way. It's like, no. Just stand, hold on to something.
Interesting.
Push down on it, let it come up, measure it, pull up on it, let it come down, measure it. You got the stiction zone. You're a detective. Where this actually started from was the RM 250 in 1986. It had an eccentric cam. So like I say, a really, really good linkage is 3 to 5 millimeters. Stiction zone. These things were 35 millimeters.
Yikes. I don't remember that.
They only had that 1 year.
Okay.
They asked me for a quote. I think one of the magazines asked me for a quote at the time. It said, which is the worst motorcycle? Or which is the slowest? Or which is the whatever? And I go, 1986 RM 125. The only thing slower than that was a 1986 RM 250. And of course I was joking just a little bit, but anyway, the point is that in that era it was they tried stuff. They tried different things, and you had the Unitrack and the this and the that and whatever. And again, whether it compress it from the top, the bottom, the sideways, none of that matters. What matters is what's the leverage ratio curve.
Right.
And so, like I was saying, I started doing leverage ratio curves and actually measuring, and then I would hold them up over each other. And so one of the advantages that I've had is the engineering degree. And the engineering degree doesn't mean that I know how to set suspension up properly. It means that I've learned to a very great extent how to learn. And so it's a matter of being able to go use a scientific method and not tell the rider how it's working because you looked at him and you want it to work better and you've told him, oh, it looks way better through that series of, braking bumps or something. You let the rider tell you what the rider wants to tell you, and you let it be open so that you can learn and you can make a better product instead of I joke about this, but we used to have magazine tests where it had 6 guys that would be measured. I would predict once the first rider said what his feedback was, he gave the feedback to everybody else, told them, I could predict what all the rest of the riders would say. If the first guy was the fastest guy and he said, this thing works awesome, every other rider will say exactly the same thing. If the first guy was the novice guy and he said, this is awesome, when it got to the guy that was faster, he'd say, it's pretty good, but it's a little soft. 100% of the time.
Yeah, we're very careful not to we tell our test drivers don't talk to each other.
There you go.
It influences it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, anyway, the point is, I don't know why I got off quite on that. But anyway, we're talking about linkages and leverage ratio curves and, how the stuff evolved. I do leverage ratio curves and I measure between 50 millimeters and 250 millimeters and I do a percentage change. And so I talk about leverage ratios as a percentage change between those two points. Why do I do that? It's a method that I made up. Nobody was telling me how to do this stuff when I started it, and I made it up. And so if you look at like the rise in rate of, say the monoshockers, 0%, it was flat, completely flat. It'd be just like mounting dual shocks with the, one mount at the rear axle and one nearly vertical up from there, just like in an arc kind of a thing. It's flat leverage ratio curve.
What do you think of this air fork return? Is it just a scam, just cheaper to make? Because I don't know anybody who goes, yeah, I like that better. That feels better.
We went through that in the 70s.
I know.
And when it was over, and so we did a bunch of conversions of damping rods and, whatever into regular springs. And the thing about air, again, the problem with air is the more you depend on air, the more seal drag you have. It's not generally you go, gee, how could I add some seal drag to make my suspension work better?
Right. Friction, bad.
Friction bad. You know, it's like, so what this latest iteration compared to the first iteration, they understood it a lot better and did a lot more with negative springs, you know, basically long, soft top-out springs. If you look at the first Fox air shocks, for example, and this was back when they were laying, you know, dual shocks down in the back, the very first shock that they had was a single pressure. And what it would do, the problem is it would ramp too fast, you know, and so it was too progressive. Again, not what people want to hear. And again, I will tell you, I will make it feel more progressive by making it less progressive.
Okay.
But again, people don't want to hear that, so I'll just try it, okay? But then Fox figured out, hey, it's too progressive. What do I need to do to make it too progressive? What they did was the shock shaft was, you know, 1.25 inches or something like that. What they did was they put a bladder inside there that was captive, that had the high pressure. And so what would happen is the pressure on the outside, once it ramped up to the pressure that's in that bladder was set at, basically the force curve looked like this and then like this. So basically once it compressed that bladder, once it reached that pressure in the bladder, now it added the volume of that. And so instead of ramping up like this, which is what air does, it basically went up like this. And I'm exaggerating, right? But it basically had, you know, the overall thing was more like this. So again, it was an attempt to make the spring rate less progressive than straight air would be.
Okay.
So that's all of those extra chambers and all that stuff is playing with the progressiveness and the long soft top out springs and et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that you never get away from the drag that is inherent of using, you know, compressed air or, you know, nitrogen. Doesn't make any difference what the gas is, but anyway, so the benefit to it, to a very greatest extent, I think from some manufacturers' view, is it's lighter. So
it's also cheaper to make. I think that was a big part of there.
It can be cheaper to make. Yeah, and you know, again, the factories aren't telling me what their thought processes are. I'm just guessing, right?
But you would say we're better off with spring.
Well, we sell spring conversions. We sell a lot of spring conversions. I should
tell you something.
I am biased. We sell a lot of spring conversions. Obviously, you've got the reliability of it, the lack of maintenance of it. When you go up in altitude or pressure, you know, fronts come through, you know, et cetera, you got to deal with that all the time. Air is an interesting thing too. Fork seals, they have two jobs. One is to hold the oil in. The other one is to hold the crap out, including the air. You may have experienced permanent pump up for air pressure where, you know, you have the bike, it's sitting there, its suspension's fully extended, and, you know, you take it in your garage the next day and you go, psst, and it releases well, where'd that air come from? What that did is the air actually passed the seals on the compression stroke, and where you'll notice that you have more of a problem is when your fork's chrome tubes are pitted. So what happens is it takes a little teeny gulp of air and brings a little bubble of air that
every time
and goes. So again, the seal doesn't necessarily have to leak oil, but can be leaking air in.
Well, I tell people the best thing they can do with their air fork to improve their bike is just pull them off and throw them in the garbage.
Yeah, well, like I said, we do spring conversions. And we do a ton of spring conversions. But anyway, you were asking about kind of evolution of this stuff, and you know, one of the major advantages. So once they got into leverage ratio curves, and I was starting to talk about percentages, Suzuki RM full floater back in '82 was a rising rate of about 23% rising rate. Currently, most motocrossers are in the 30 to 35% rising rate. But if you look at the evolution of leverage ratio curves, you know, we do this in an advanced seminar of, you know, here, this one did this one that, and we're laying them over the top of each other, right?
Okay.
And then as time has gone on, you know, they're into a closer and closer and closer range. And you know, I would joke, it's like you think the manufacturers, they know they're going to sell at least 5 motorcycles. to this brand, that brand, that they all know what each other's doing.
It's so funny. And I don't, some people know this, some people don't, but you go out to pick your manufacturer test. Mm-hmm. If they're testing their motorcycle, they have one of every other brand. So to your point, they're all buying each other's bikes and comparing them back to back.
And they need to. I'm not saying, it's like I was kind of going, well, this is what people do in the industry. They copy other people, but they need to know what they're up against. They can't just sit, our bike is the best. They really need to test. But anyway, leverage ratio curves have gotten closer and closer and closer. And so kind of once we're into the 90s, mid-90s, once you got rid of the YZ490 that had a rise in rate of about 9.5%. Was that the last of the 490, air-cooled Yamahas? And, once they went into the more modern range, actually Yamaha kind of went more into the 35, 36% earlier than any other manufacturers. And again, those numbers that I'm throwing out are based on how I measure leverage ratio.
Okay.
Somebody else could go, oh, that's not the leverage ratio, and I start from zero and end at the end. This is the way I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But anyway, what it does, it gives me a reference that I can compare, and I can look at patterns. I can go, why does this bike work this way? Why do people like this bike and they prefer it over this one? And it's just a matter of just patterns and elimination, and so.
So then we've seen bigger diameter forks, axles, bigger, smaller diameter, that kind of stuff is tweaked and changed. Obviously, they've all kind of, as you said, have kind of gotten closer and closer to where they're all sort of learning from each other collectively. So I guess I got two questions. One, do you think there's anything major coming down the road? Like if there was one big change you could make, is there anything you'd pull out, or do you think where we're at now?
So there are incremental things that are going on right now. Surface finishes, coatings, really right now more surface finishes than anything else. So, for example, you can look at the chrome fork tube, right? And look at some of that are just super highly polished, or, they got into coatings a lot, the titanium nitrides and the, DLCs and et cetera. And, some of the stuff was even as just chrome to chrome, super, super polished. When a seal manufacturer gives a surface roughness, they give it as a range. It is not a specific smoothness, and smoother is not better.
Oh, really?
Smoother is not better. And so this is common misconception, because a lot of times, people go, oh, well, I'm going to make it slippery as possible. I'm going to just polish. The surface irregularities hold the oil. The biggest issue that you have is with the seal is, it's, suspensions, the suspension movement like this. What you want is as free a movement as you can have as far as breakaway. You want damping there. You don't want to just be, no damping, but you want the breakaway to be as small as possible. And so, through the years, they've done everything from Teflon coating seals to, decreasing the spring pressure of how it is. The seal, to the very greatest extent, uses the pressure behind it to cause it to seal.
Okay.
But again, that's the downside of when you get into air assist, and so you up the pressures, then the more pressure creates more drag. So
it makes sense, because it always feels like it has a crust that it has to break through.
Exactly. And increasing the surface roughness can improve that.
That's interesting, because I saw a company, and I don't think they're in business any longer, but it was super interesting to me. They were doing like this cross-hatching, kind of like scoring it, just very slightly, but you could see it if you look close. And it's, this is from the auto industry. They're doing this, and I don't know. I'm just like, huh.
That's
different.
I will just toss out that it may have come from the research that we did. So basically what happened is I had one of my techs was working on, he had a Triumph 1050 or something like that, right? And they were putting a cartridge one of our cartridges in the front end, and it said, and I'm just walking through the shop as they're working on it, and they're doing a sag, right? And we don't really do sags too much on dirt bike front ends. Do it mostly on the rear. Street bikes we do front and rear. Okay, and so they were doing a sag on that, and they actually took the bike off of the side stand and put it on the center stand, and I noticed that the suspension didn't compress. So obviously some of the load is on the side stand. When you take it off, it should compress. Didn't compress at all. I went, well, let me feel this thing, and I pushed on it, and it was like, and I said, until you get rid of that stiction, don't even bother doing anything with the rest of it. And so what that did is, and I had just hired Rob Brown, and Rob Brown, frankly, has been a godsend. He is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. Gives a rat's ass about what he does in every area of what he does, and just I think many ways a genius. All right. But anyway, so he's sitting there going, and all right, he started testing oils. He started testing surface finishes. He's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and so it is not uncommon for the stiction zone on a front end to be 35 millimeters. I've seen it where it's 65 to 75 millimeters of stiction zone. Okay, how's that front end going to? Front end doesn't work. It doesn't matter what you put in there when your stiction zone is that great. But anyway, Rob did a ton of testing. We actually cross-hatched our fork tubes. Every single set of suspension that comes through the shop, we put a crosshatch on it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that came from us. Okay, came specifically from Rob and the testing that he did. We were actually using 220 grit sandpaper, aluminum oxide sandpaper. I don't know if you're familiar with 220 grit, but 220 grit, you're looking at it going, are we actually going to plant some corn seed here, or what the heck is going on? But that cross section, the reason we now use 400 grit sandpaper, but we still put a cross section on it. The major reason why we don't use 220 is just people's reaction to it. Because they go, oh, that can't work. You're ruining my forks, and well, just bring them back, and I can put 400 grit on it, and I can make it look just like it did before. But the point is that we can drastically reduce the friction by putting a crosshatch on it. We also did tremendous amount of oil testing. And the oil, so as far as I am concerned, we have the absolute best oils on the planet. Now, obviously, I'm biased, but we've done a ton of testing. And the only thing I would say is that if you're going to test our oil, make sure you get every bit of oil of the previous oil out, because that will actually contaminate our oil. The residual will contaminate, so make sure it's clean. But the stiction zone is radically different on the front end. Most people don't ever measure stiction zones on the front end.
No.
Anyway.
But you think that's sort of the next thing is the coatings and that kind of stuff?
Well, not so much coatings. We've done the titanium nitride and the DLC and whatnot, and it was one of the reasons why people had to have kit suspension, right? It's like, oh my God, I can't compete against these guys unless I've got a coating on it.
His
right?
forks are green down on the bottom.
Yeah, and I can't possibly compete with that, right? And the problem was with those is they generally would make them highly polished and then coat them. So generally you would buy them that way, but we can actually do the secondary coatings. But I would always recommend to people, do the crosshatch before you send it out to be coated. Okay, but the truth of the matter is the crosshatch is going to get you way more than you possibly can imagine. And in fact, you'll notice at WP, their kit stuff no longer has coatings on it. Okay, it's basically chrome. And
so was that all a marketing ploy?
I don't think it was originally intended as a marketing ploy, but it became a marketing thing big time. I mean, it's like, you were talking about fork tube diameters, 47 versus 49. Showa was brilliant when they came out with their 47 versus 49. In the early days of 49 millimeter forks, you couldn't get 49 millimeter forks if you were a regular person. That was factory only. Those were, my understanding, $20,000 set of forks. You couldn't even get it. So what do people want? Something they can't have, so they have to have the 49. And the truth is that you can get too much rigidity and have a negative effect. This is just from my experience. Have a negative effect over, actually the front end. You've gone through ruts before where it feels like the front wheel was like locked in like a slot car into a rut. So cross rutting, whatever. We did early testing with cross brace on right side up forks, where they basically tied the triple clamps together, right? And I was, oh man, this is going to be awesome. The ruts had more control of me, and that was of right side up forks. Okay, so I don't want to get into too much of that because people go, oh, this guy's a real kook, But
well, I think the diameter thing, maybe the bigger, firmer forks, because that's going to give you way more rigidity. That worked on a steel frame, where the frame could flex and move. It was when everybody went to aluminum. If you go back, now everyone is back to and I think Wyndham and the Geico team were the first ones I saw do this, is just go back to production forks and go, that's better,
Oh,
So,
and I mean, there are, when we look at development of motorcycles, one of the things, tire technology, rigidity, certainly we've gone through the travel thing, but the travel thing is kind of, there are, air or no air, et cetera, those kind of things have changed. Obviously the advent, which we didn't talk about, the advent of the cartridge over the damping rod. Well, the reason why they came up with a cartridge is to make the damping curve less progressive than a damping rod fork. Ding. Yeah, it's like, oh, okay. So the trick is to make it progressive enough, but not too progressive, both in the spring force, which is the mechanical portion of it, which is leverage ratio curves, as well as the damping force, which is, we can do that with orifices and, valving stacks and, et cetera, et cetera. So, certainly as time has gone on, cartridge sizes have changed. Oh, and by the way, too, 49 millimeter versus 47 millimeters or 48 or whatever, the bigger the seals, the more seal drag you have. Okay, so for the same amount of, 1 PSI pump up, now you've got more seal drag. So there is a limiting factor, and larger you go, basically what happens is as you increase the diameter, you can make the wall thickness thinner. So you can maintain the same weight of the suspension to a certain point, at which, I mean, once it gets so thin that
there's a breakover, sure.
Yeah, there's a, you can crease and, et cetera, and your springs actually, anyway. But the point is there are some trade-offs, and, they've flirted with 51, 52 millimeter. If you look at some of the early stuff, I have a set of Simon's forks, which are 60 millimeters, which is the original upside down ones.
I remember those.
Yeah.
I think RJ ran those in 84-ish.
Yeah, I mean, that was the original upside down fork, and so if we looked at technology advancements, right side up versus upside down is one of those things too. So
okay, I'm going to ask you this. This is something I'm curious on. Dave Osterman. I don't know how well you know him, but he has preached for the longest time, and we're working on trying to test this, that when we went away from the floating rear brake, there was a huge mistake. That was a huge mistake. And the way he explains it to me is this. And folks that don't know what that is, if you look at, and he brings something up very interesting, is that the same time, all of these manufacturers went to disc brakes right at around the same time, mid-80s-ish, right? And when they went to disc brakes, the floating rear brake was gone. Not because you couldn't do it or it was hard to machine, it's just gone.
It's actually easier to do on a disc brake.
So his question is why, and what he explains is if he goes because I have an 86 YZ125 that has one here, and he goes, take your bike off the stand. He goes, now, stand up and down on the foot pegs, and you'll watch the bike move, evenly up and down. He goes, now put your foot on the rear brake and try to do the same thing. And the back end is locked up. It doesn't allow it to move as freely. And so he goes, I mean, just on its face, you can look at it and go, yeah, in braking bumps, when you're on that brake, it's going to affect the way the rear shock works. Where with a floating one, with the floating one, it doesn't do that. With a regular non-floating rear brake, it locks the rear end up. What is your thoughts on that? Because he has preached this to Mitch, to the Yamaha Troy team when he worked for them, to Tutu, and he goes, I can't believe I can't get anyone to even go, yeah, let's try that.
Yeah, well, I would let's put it this way. Initially, I would say absolutely I would be all for that and go test. And, the downside that was done with drum brakes, with the floating brake. The downside of that, and it's something, because we do tons of vintage stuff, right?
Okay.
And a lot of them have floating brakes on it. And we actually arc brakes, so we actually cut them to the drum and et cetera. So we can actually make a set of drum brakes work really, really well.
Okay.
So we're dealing with that kind of stuff all the time. One of the things that people didn't do is maintain all those bushings. So the one on the backing plate was the one that was most notorious. We've had guys say, my suspension sucks, and I look at it and push on it and go, ugh, and I just loosen the axle, and all of a sudden it's all free, so that the backing plate could move on that. So, the downside of having 3 extra pivot points is that you've got 3 extra pivot points.
Right.
Okay. That's a relatively minor downside. And so I would say, yeah, that would be worth testing.
I mean, if you're just looking at it from a physics standpoint, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Why did we just go away from it? Why did it just disappear? Cost? I mean, it has to be just cost.
I mean, look, they did you remember the BASS system on the Yamaha?
Yeah.
Yeah, the BASS system was like you hit the rear brake and it was supposed to decrease the compression damping so that it was, and then, what did we do? We took the thing off and it didn't do anything.
We plugged it on this one.
Yeah, we plugged it. Yeah. It's like that. I mean, that bike had a 10% leverage ratio rise in rate. So it was already 2 strikes against it to begin with. It's like you could have that BASS system or not, and it didn't really. Anyway, so yeah, I would say that would be worth testing, but it's got to be unbiased too. It's got to be where the riders don't have a clue, and the suspension setup needs to be the same.
Yeah, same bike. And the problem is you got to machine some things off the swing arm. Like there's a little bit of work to make it happen.
Yeah.
I'll show you some pictures later. He sent me. He fabbed one up for this mini bike he has, and of course, you ask him. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But
well, yeah, I mean,
I'm interested in it.
Yeah, the problem with we get ideas, and I mean, Osterman rock and roll. The difficulty with any testing is to be able to do it unbiased.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, the next little question here is our Seat Concepts hot seat question. If you guys need a seat cover, complete rebuild, something for a snowmobile, they make wet weather, cold weather seats. Check out Seat Concepts, great stuff. Okay, so I want you to imagine I'm a average weekend warrior guy, because I get this a lot. Dudes get really spun out with compression, rebound, high speed, low speed, and they just kind of leave it alone, or they start fiddling with clickers and go, oh, it's worse. And then, their minds explode. And we actually have a segment, a video feature we do called Race Spec, which you guys sponsor. It's the Race Tech Race Spec videos, where we take out a production bike, find a really good base setting for it in terms of clicker position, sag, which is usually manufacturer recommended, and just say, here, start here, guys. And then, and we reference your spring rate chart on your website, which is a great place to start if you aren't sure where your spring rate should be.
It's not only a good place to start, it's a good place to end.
Start and end. Yeah, live there.
So I'm biased, but people screw their stuff up. We know that all kinds of companies use our website to figure out what spring rates. That's okay. It's perfectly okay with me. I would rather have people have the correct spring rate in there than anything else. But anyway, that's the amount that people vary from what we recommend is so small, it's crazy.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic chart. Everyone should be using it if you aren't sure, if your numbers are off. But how do you explain that to people when somebody goes, hey, what do all these clickers do? Can you explain compression, rebound, high speed, low speed, front and rear?
I tell them it's a mystery.
It's kind of like
you need to send it in and we'll set it up for you.
It's a black magic.
It's black magic. Well, I mean, that's the problem with suspension. I joke with Andrew, right, in the engine department, right? And I go, all Andrew's got to do is make more horsepower everywhere and not have it blow up. Big deal, right? The problem with suspension is it's subjective. And it's the number one thing that gets blamed. So on my list at the intro to the book, so I wrote a book, I think it came out in 2010, called Race Tech's Motorcycle Suspension Bible. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I've seen it, yeah.
But anyway, and on the preface to it, the preface says, in order to be successful, you got to be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an engineer, a scientist,
And a priest.
and a priest and a magician and anyway. But the suspension is really, how do people learn about suspension? In general, they'll read articles, they'll be told something. This makes sense. If I had sat here and I had come in and said, well, you know what you got to do with suspension? You're going to make it plush and firm at the same time. You need to make everything more progressive. We could have sat there and you could have left this thing and gone, yeah, that totally makes sense. Now, when I'm sitting here saying, well, what you got to do is you got to figure out how much progression and not have too much, then it's kind of going, what? Wait a second.
Yeah, there's gray area.
Yeah, there's a gray area. And with suspension, what one person likes, you could have 100 guys, 99 of them go, this is awesome. They all weigh the same. They're all the same speed. They would all finish the exact same time. 99 of them go, this is awesome. The 100th guy will go, it's too soft. Most of the time, the 100th guy, now the 100th guy sometimes is a hammerhead that just hits every bump twice. But quite often it's, I am so fast that this is too soft for me. Okay, so it's just an ego thing where it's...
Or you get told something like, no, if you make it firmer, then you can push harder. I mean, there's all sorts of stories and theories.
When we get to rebound, this is a really, really big deal too. But also the 101st guy thinks it's too stiff, but he won't say anything. Because why? Because he thinks, I guess I'm not as fast as those guys in Hawaii, or whatever, in California or whatever. It's like, no, this guy might prefer it. The truth is that there's personal preference on all this stuff. And there's, again, the variables of, did you put the front wheel on correctly, and et cetera, and is your tire pressure right?
Right.
And did you, but
there's a billion variables. I just want to get like a general,
right.
And it's going to be a 30,000 foot level. What do each of those adjustments do, and when should they mess with them?
Okay.
How would you've only got 5 minutes or 10 minutes with a guy, and he asks you this question. What do you say?
Okay. So what I would do is I would work from the most critical to the least critical. The most critical is the rear shock rebound damping. It is the most misunderstood setting that you can possibly do.
It's the least touched by me. I can tell you that right now.
Way to go.
I'm just telling you.
No, way to go. Because here's the thing. If I were to ask people, okay, what is the number one symptom that needs to be fixed on suspension? Number one symptom would be, people would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, my bike is kicking. Okay, my bike is kicking. So here we go. My bike is kicking. What does Dad do to fix it?
Slows the rebound down.
Bingo. Exactly the wrong thing to do. Okay, but the reason why Dad does that is, first of all, he's been told by all the other dads that, the bike's kicking. What? Because he'll go, I don't know what to do. What should I do? And he goes, well, you need to slow the rebound down. Because the perception in people's mind is that the wheel hits the bump and then recoils uncontrollably and throws the rear seat up into the rider's ass. Okay, that does not happen. Okay. In fact, you could take the rebound adjuster, back it all the way out, and I would say do this with caution and whatever, but you will be blown away at how quick you can make the suspension and have the bike not kick. Now, it will get loose feeling, so if you're going through a series of, whoops or something like that, sand rollers, high speed, whatever, the bike will start to feel kind of loose on you. And that adjustment also on most bikes is a symmetric adjustment, meaning the flow on the compression stroke and the flow on the rebound are affected the same. We create something called a rebound separator valve that separates those two. It allows us to run way faster low-speed rebound while maintaining more low-speed compression damping. So we don't pay the price. So one of the things that you get, the benefit of lighter rebound damping, is you get better grip. So I was talking about saddleback and the four clicker adjuster, right? So lighter rebound damping. So the thing is that when a wheel hits a bump, wheel hits a bump, it's thrown upward. Center of gravity of the motorcycle wants to move along in a straight line. Wheel moves up and down underneath it. When it hits the bump, it's thrown up. When it crests that bump, it still wants to go up. Body in motion wants to remain in motion, all right? You don't want it to, what you would prefer it to do is to basically be front side, back side of the bump, have the same pressure. That ain't going to happen. Okay, unless we have totally active suspension where it's sucking the wheel up and then pushing it back down. But that's not in any foreseeable future, especially with a motocross bike, all right? So the body in motion wants to remain in motion, so you need a certain amount of compression damping to keep it from going up like that. And on the rebound side of it, if you've got too much rebound damping, meaning it's too slow, it crests that bump and then it stays airborne until it takes time for it to get back in contact with the ground. The faster that you go, the quicker your rebound needs to be, not the slower. Most people think, hey, the faster that I am, the more damping, the stiffer, the whatever. It's like Supercross. How do you set up to Supercross? Stiff. Not quite so fast. All right. So as far as rebound is concerned, there's a trade-off between a feeling or sensation of control and grip, say, or traction. Okay. As I speed it up, my feeling of sensation of control, I start to lose that. While my grip is actually improving, my sensation of control gets worse, and this has is extremely tied to what you're used to and what kind of surfaces you're used to riding on. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Ricky Carmichael, and so this will probably get back to me, but Ricky Carmichael grew up on sand. Okay, sand, you can get away with slower rebound damping.
Big rolly bumps.
Yeah, and the
traction's not as much of an issue.
Traction's not an issue. More rolling bumps. The sand actually moves, et cetera, et cetera. So when a bike kicks, what does Dad do? Slows down the rebound a couple clicks. Asks the kid, hey, how was that? Oh, that was better, Dad. Especially if he's talked to his friends. Oh, well, what's Dad do? Well, that says rebound. Now, because what you believe is correct, right? And the thing is that next time the bike kicks, what does Dad do? Oh, I know what to do. Click, click. He's already gotten feedback over it, and he already knows that works. The problem is on Dad's list of symptoms that the kid's talking about, there is nothing on that list that says speed that rebound up. So that becomes a one-way adjuster. Click, click, next time. Click, click, next time. Click, click. Only in. The number of bikes that we get in where we always check where the settings are before we take it apart. Things 3 clicks out. Well, why is it 3 clicks out, not 2 or 1? Well, they know they've gone to the end of the range of adjustment. It still doesn't work right now, and we got to get it set up. Okay. Well, so rebound adjuster, the most misunderstood thing. The truth is that the kicking is caused by either too slow a rebound because it's packing. It's way too soft. It's going through the end of the travel. It doesn't have any more room to go. And then the bike loads the frame and it's got to spit some other place. Or it's way too harsh, meaning it's got way too much damping or whatever it is. So it's not moving. So it's deflecting off of it. So it's either packing, way too soft, way too stiff. And the packing is way too slow a rebound damping, not too quick. And I would just encourage people to experiment. So at Racetech, once we built the Gold Valve kit, the biggest problem that we have dealt with is that the installation was incorrect. Okay, so people put it in. We've had people, hey, can you take a picture of that? And I got tech support. I got 4 or 5 guys on tech support all the time. And, hey, can you take a picture of that? And you take a picture and the valving stack's in upside down. Or the piston's in upside down or whatever it is. People are well-meaning, but people don't like to read instructions. People don't like to, and so the other thing that we'll do is we give, preload settings, we give clicker settings, et cetera, et cetera. You put it together. People will push on the bike and go, oh, this can't work. especially if they're used to, they've run out of adjustment, right? They go, oh, it can't work. And so what do? Click, 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 click. Okay, now go right. Well, it's good, but it's not as good as I expected it to be. The number of guys that, they'll call up and say, hey, I'm having this problem. We always give them setup sheets. We all tell them. And so what we'll do, we want to be really super respectful to the people because they're just doing the best that they can. But one of the things that we'll do is get them to put it back to the original setting and try it. Okay, now, depending on who actually did the install, will tell us kind of where our next step is. But most of our problems are taken care of by putting them back to the original setting. Now, the manufacturer, obviously, he's got a super, or he or she's got a super problem. They have to set it up for the average rider. Well, who's that? What weight rider, and et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that I always tell people that come to the seminars, I said, this is job security. The big deal with a motorcycle is the rider weight is such a big percentage of the overall vehicle rider weight that changing the rider weight in a car doesn't make any difference, right? Changing on a motorcycle is big time, and different kinds of conditions, usage, et cetera, et cetera. Suspension is something that, it's not where we got, here you go. Yeah. That may happen at some point in time. You're talking about future, but at this point in time, that's not the way that it is. And so setting it up for the particular condition and weight and et cetera, is huge. And what our job as a suspension designer, tuner, whatever, is to create the greatest amount of range off of what we're setting it up for, so that it's not like we can set up for motocross and get, okay, race supercross with that.
Yeah. Even tracks, like you said, the difference between how you'd set it up for Glen Helen or versus Redbud, it's quite different.
Well, and
Glen Helen on a Thursday, I should say,
yeah, well,
hard and slick and terrible.
Well, yeah, and there's a yes and a no to that, and depends on what setting you had at Glen Helen. Okay, so and I'll go back to Vince Freese, right? Love him, hate him, whatever. I love him, and whatever. Anyway, really great guy.
He's a great guy. I think he's maybe he's made some bad choices on the track, but
yeah, I'm not.
But
let's not go there now.
No,
but yeah, so
he's a great guy.
But yeah, he's a great guy. Very, very hardworking, very dedicated. So he goes and one of his first kind of claims to fame is he gets third as a privateer in East Coast Supercross. So the 250 series, he gets third. And do you know how many different settings he used? Do you know how many times the suspension was rebuilt? None.
Is that right?
Yeah. You know how many different settings? None.
Just ran it.
That wasn't the problem. Okay? So he's learning the tracks and et cetera, et cetera. Are there things that we can do on certain tracks? Yeah. Harder packed track, slicker track, back the rebound out. Sand track, you can use more rebound, but make sure you back it out back for the harder packed tracks.
I think that rebound thing, there is a huge mistake. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I'm a little scared to open it up too much because I'm like, I don't want to get bucked over the bars.
Right. It's going to spit me off.
Yeah, maybe I need to. I will. I promise you, start playing with that more.
Yeah, I would encourage it. Just obviously be safe about it, but experiment on different conditions. So if you're testing on a just prepped track that's got perfect traction, don't expect to feel an effect on traction. You only can tell the difference in traction when you're at the limit of traction.
Right.
So me on the Saddleback burnt, high school track, I mean, that was like polished adobe with sand sprinkled on the top, and you will, let's put it this way, it will be fun for you to do that experimenting. And you got to make sure, a lot of times what manufacturers do on their adjustment, the range of adjustment, they make the range so small that you can't screw it up.
Yeah, they're not going to make it to where it's just going to shoot you over the handlebars anyway like a rocket.
Yeah, well, and some of them, again, it depends on the bike. Some of them have more range than the other. But what I would want you to do is actually just push on the bike and feel it, but get to know what that range, and obviously always know where you came from. Always write down where your original setting was, but you would be surprised. So, we've just gotten through one adjuster here.
Yeah, I know. So, okay, I'm going to play with that. Tell me about high speed and low speed. And obviously, SAG, we've kind of covered, and whatever the manufacturer recommendation is, or watch our race spec videos, because we'll give you a good starting point there for a number. If a guy says, okay, high speed and low speed, help me out.
Yeah, so damping is sensitive to velocity, not bike velocity, but suspension velocity. Okay, so how fast it is compressing, or how fast it's, what the wheel is forced on compression. So rebound is forced by the spring. The spring pushes back on the rebound. Compression is forced by the shape and the size of the bump and the speed at which you hit it.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously if you have a certain size bump and you hit it at twice the speed, it needs to move up twice as fast, for it to have the same feedback to the rider. Okay, hit it at twice the speed, the more it wants to go up in motion, the more it wants to continue in motion. People have looked at high and low speed as little bumps, high speed is big bumps. There's something to be said for that. However, what it really is how fast is that suspension moving. So, for example, seat bounce. Okay, seat bounce where you're sitting on the bike and unloading to get more height, to get a little bit extra to clear an obstacle. Is that high speed or low speed? Good question, huh?
Yeah, it is a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Until I actually bought a data acquisition company back in 2000, and I worked with it for 10 years and lost a lot of money on it, but learned a lot. Okay. So learned a lot. Expensive lesson, but and I wouldn't do it any differently. And so it was a shock lock. But and the limit of that was I got to a point where the technology that I had, I couldn't do track mapping with it. What people always want with data acquisition is they want data acquisition to give you a happy face if it's working right. It's like,
thumbs
green
up.
dot, thumbs up, but I've never seen anything that does, and so
it's just numbers, and you have
to interpret it. And I did a whole bunch of work with the numbers. It was really beneficial, but it wasn't that happy face, But anyway, doing the data acquisition, we actually could see it's like it's really more of a mid-speed. But whenever you're talking about damping and damping changes, the thing that you have to be able to do is to connect it to where on the track, what velocity you're actually creating. And the problem is that you don't know. If you have braking bumps, for example, are those high speed or low speed?
Well, it depends on the shape of the bump. It depends on how fast you're going, right?
Absolutely. So that's actually the best answer you could give me.
Yeah.
But the point is that you could actually get into much higher velocities than you think by looking at the size of the bump. Because if you went, that's a small bump. Well, what's a small bump? And what's a small bump to a road race guy is a lot different than a small bump to a motocross guy. But a small bump, if you got a bump like that, well, if it's a square edge bump, it could move really, really really quickly. And it'll depend on how you load that bike too. So you remember I was talking about Gary Denton, he can float the bike on everything, right? Well,
like the way Jet Lawrence rides, kind of hopping and floting versus
slamming.
Tomac.
Yeah, before I'm going to hit it, and here we go.
Well, something that I always wanted, and this is the problem with suspension, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. I want black and white. I want this for this. You do this for that. I had somebody say to me once, Rob Hendrickson.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
He started off working for me.
And he said to me one time, because I'm asking him these questions, as a racer, it behooves you to understand suspension and how it works, because it will only help them set your bike up, right? So I was always trying to learn, and he goes, well, I was asking about high and low speed. He goes, the thing is, low speed turns into high speed. And I'm just like, all right. I said, I give up. Just watch me. If it looks good, if it doesn't.
And that actually, yes, there's something to be said for that. And when I start in the seminars and I talk about damping curves, and the truth is most people won't have a shock dyno. And the truth is that most people that do have a shock dyno don't have a shock dyno that will get them into the range of what they actually need to see.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. No, shock dynos open up a whole nother can of worms that, we just bought a new shock dyno that we're just getting ready to install that Kawasaki has one, we have one, and my understanding Fox will have one. Ours is serial number 2.
Oh boy.
If you look at velocities, for example, most of the dynos that are out there, you can see maybe half a meter per second. If I told you half a meter per second, you wouldn't have anything to compare it against, so you wouldn't know. Half a meter per second is a reasonable number to work with for road race, street guys, grip, for rebound damping, etc. It is not even close for getting into the compression side of it.
Okay.
So you've got 2 basic types of dynos. One is a dyno that's a rotary dyno that basically has a connecting rod on it or a Scotch yoke mechanism that basically creates sine wave motion that basically forces the compression at the same velocity as rebound. Okay. Then you've got a linear actuated motor, which is basically linear, just as it sounds. It basically is an electric motor that goes in a straight line back and forth. Those are programmable, so we can force compression to go faster than rebound. The problem with the rotary motors is the damping created at a certain velocity on rebound is a lot greater than it is on compression. And so if you try to force, in a rotary sense, the amount that you actually would see on the compression stroke, the rebound damping would be so high that you would break things. And so you really need asymmetric motion, meaning it's not symmetric. Okay, so that we need to be able to force compression
at a different speed than
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 meters per second. And that dyno that can do half a meter per second, pretty good for the rebound side of it, but not so much on the compression side of it. And so people will get dynos and they'll make all kinds of judgments, assumptions, et cetera, and go, oh, yes, here we go. But they're only seeing this little teeny portion of a graph that should be this big.
Yeah.
And they don't really know. All they can do is extrapolate, meaning extend the line, and it's like, no, really, you can only see to here.
Right.
And so we've had a Rohrig Emma, which is electromotive actuator. So I don't really know. But basically, it's a linear electric motor, and we could see 5 meters per second. Okay, that dyno actually is at Rob's place. Rob's actually working out of Chicago area. Again, you give the genius his tools so that he can work with it.
Yeah.
We actually just took... the guys that were at Rohrig actually got bought out by another company. Rohrig got bought out by another company. The guys that used to work for Rohrig started their own company called CTW. And so they're building dynos. This dyno is, like I say, they may build more than the 3 that I'm aware of, but
one of 3 right now.
But one of 3 right now. We can actually see 10 meters per second.
Wow.
10 meters per second is so far out of the range of what most people can see. We had to get completely different electrical, because electrical, and we're just installing that now. Like I said, we could see 5 meters per second, but we couldn't really, when we're developing pistons, gold valves, et cetera. Gold valves have had easily over 500 iterations. So it's not a, hey, I made this valve and this is the way it is. And we continue to develop that constantly. To be able to guess at what goes on at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 meters per second is just a guess.
And are those metrics that we actually see riding motocross? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and interesting enough, you'll see a lot of the high velocities on cross country.
Just because of higher speeds, or
because we set the cross country bikes up softer. Mm-hmm. You set up a supercross bike and it has a lot of damping, and not that more is better, but it has a lot of damping. And so quite often you'll get in a situation where you're not actually seeing that. You think, oh, well, supercross, extremely high velocities. Depends on the suspension setup. If the suspension setup's super, super stiff, particularly damping wise, you may not get into the high velocity. In fact, I ask people too, it's like landing off a jump. Where's your highest velocity? What kind of conditions on the track? Is it, the whoop section? Is it braking bumps? Is it landing off of jumps, et cetera, et cetera? generally the highest velocities that you'll see are landing off of bumps, off of jumps. The early days of Supercross, if you will remember, takeoff jump was like this, landing jump was like this.
Yeah, like an excite bike track.
Yeah, it's like you go, okay. Now landing jumps are like this.
Yeah.
Much, 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 much safer than they were. Some of the whoops, not as safe as they used to be. The whoops used to be way, way smaller, and but they used to also take and pile up dirt and take a backhoe and go like this and go like this. So you had square waves, going through. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with this. So
I'm trying to high speed, low speed.
High speed, low speed.
What do you tell a guy?
Come on back.
Welcome
Come
back.
on back.
Bring it out of the clouds.
Yeah. Okay.
Ground level for some.
Never mind.
Some. I know it's interesting information, but like I'm just saying, some guy you got to speak like I'm a fifth grader.
So the trick with setting up suspension damping wise is to figure out what velocity that you're dealing with. When I was saying landing off of a jump, depends on how you land. If you land perfectly on the backside of the jump, the velocity can be relatively low speed. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're having a bottoming issue landing off of jumps. Are you over jumping? If you're over jumping and landing flat or closer to flat, much, much, much higher velocities. Okay, if you're landing perfectly on the downside of a designed, can be relatively low velocity. So that low speed adjuster, that high speed adjuster, and Rob is absolutely correct, it transitions. And one of the problems with having a low speed adjuster and high speed adjuster is that we incorrectly think that now we have complete control of the damping curve. The adjusters are a teeny little portion of the adjustment. And again, the manufacturers, the old days, high-speed adjusters, you'd take them all the way out, all the way in, made it a little bit harsher when it went all the way in. You couldn't screw it up.
I tend to use the high speed as a way to control my ride height in the back. Is that stupid? Because sometimes it'll feel high and I want it to just settle into the turn a little bit more. So I tend to soften it a touch to get it to kind of settle in.
So a couple of things. One is it depends on how that high-speed adjuster was designed. All high-speed adjusters aren't the same.
Bike to bike?
Bike to bike. Yeah. Well, model to model. Okay. So it's not a production tolerance kind of an issue. It's like a CRF 250 and CRF 250, they'll work fairly close to the same. They're very good at their production tolerances. But different bikes, one adjuster will have much higher effect than another one. You could certainly, and again, the difficulty that you will have is having an unbiased opinion of the change that you just made, that what you changed. Because you changed it, you go, okay, this should do this. Again, depending on the adjuster, you might get it into and get some ride height changes. Again, you're talking about wherever there's higher velocities. You can get fairly high whip sections. You can get some pretty high velocities in a whip section. And fairly high rebound velocity because you're using a lot of travel. Again, you've got to look at and guess in your mind whether that's high speed or higher speed or lower speed. And understand, too, that the low-speed adjustment is a tapered needle in an orifice. Okay, the high-speed adjustment is a preload on a spring that typically is pushing onto a little valving stack in there. Okay, that low-speed adjuster affects the entire range.
The clicker. Yeah,
the low-speed clicker. The low-speed clicker is just a tapered needle in orifice. So back in the old days of carburetor, you remember carburetors?
I remember them all.
Okay. There were charts out from some of the manufacturers that said that the pilot jet, basically, when it went throttle position, effect, right? And it went pilot jet and it went like this. Pilot jet goes like this. Doesn't go like this. Okay, so the question is, does the pilot jet affect the main jet?
So I feel like that's kind of the low speed affecting the high speed. Like one bleeds into the other, right?
Exactly. It still flows. What it does is a jet orifice velocity squares. And so it's passing fuel, it only wants to pass so much fuel. Can we have it pass more fuel? Yeah, we can keep bumping up the pressure, and we can cut metal with with water. A water jet can cut metal, right? So that's huge pressures, right? So in the carburetor, basically the pilot jet flows, doesn't stop flowing, it just flows. So if you increase that by this orifice size, it is adding to the amount that the main jet has. It's not on the same circuit, it's a completely separate circuit. Okay, and you can go and prove that one to yourself. Go and take the pilot jet out, or or make a big change in pilot jet. It'll have a huge effect on your main jet.
Yeah.
Same thing with that taper needle in an orifice. Your low speed adjuster affects your high speed. Percentage-wise, it doesn't change it as much as the low speed. I always ask the question to the students: does a rider feel a change, or do they feel a percentage change? Rider feels a percentage change. Okay, so if you have a bike that has a 10 kilogram per millimeter spring, and you go from 10.0 to 10.2, and you had another bike that was set up as a 5 kilogram per millimeter spring, it goes from 5.0 to 5.2, which one has the greater change? Yeah.
Well, yeah, you tell me. I guess I'm
okay. You might say, well, it's a 0.2 of a kilogram per millimeter change, so it's the same amount, right? You go, okay, 10.2 to 10.0 to 10.2, 5.0 to 5.2. Twice as big a change for 5.0 to 5.2, because it's percentage-wise, it's a bigger change.
Oh, gotcha. See, this is the problem. I'm asking you to give me a very simple answer, and there isn't a simple answer.
There isn't a simple answer, but send it in, we'll set it up. You just ride it, okay? And if you screw it up, here's your setup sheet. Put it back to where it was. Okay, anyway, I mean, obviously I don't want to. The truth is that we can add to the mystic mumbo-jumbo of suspension and make it a mysterious black art and whatever. The reason why I teach the seminars, the reason why I wrote the book is to help kids' dads turn that clicker in the right direction. Or, I mean, here's the truth. Most of the times, Supercross, Anaheim 1, what's the biggest issue? People are going, I don't feel good. I feel tight. I feel dead. My bike sucks. They can't blame it on the tire. The engine hadn't done blowed up yet. Okay. What are the things they can blame it on?
Yeah.
The things that's subjective, which is the suspension. Let's blame it on the suspension, right? So what do? Oh, my bike is kicking. Okay. What do tuners regularly do? Slow the rebound down. Riders have no idea when I go click, click, whether I've gone click, click, or whether I've gone click, click, or whether I've gone click, click.
Mm-hmm. Listen, I've had tuners do this to me. I tell this story a lot. It was the end of a very long day with Bones, and we're chasing something on the shock, and I'm tired at this point. And
sure.
this, I'm just kind of.
And the track has changed.
The track's changed. It's hard in Blue Groove, and I forget what I was even looking for. And he gets under my leg and click, try that. And I come in and I remember in my head going, yeah, I felt a little bit better. Okay. All right. Well, good. We're going, all right. Sounds good. Why don't we call it a day? Well, years later, he tells me I turned it in 2 clicks and turned it right back out 2 clicks.
Go.
So he goes, I knew you were cooked, and we just called it a day. I'm like, damn it, Bones.
Yeah,
right.
Well, and the thing is that the riders want to be good testers. And so what a rider will do is he will collect evidence that supports the right decision. So I've done a ton of testing with riders, and Rob has probably done more testing than I have, but basically I've done a ton of testing. And so you one of the things I always say is test the rider, test to see whether he knows. And so when I change I used to tell the guy every single change that I made, oh yeah, and this should work better. Rider goes out with, this should work with it better. So what does he come back with? He says, this works better. Yeah. I've realized that it's like, okay, if he doesn't know anything, I get better feedback.
Yeah.
If he's used to you telling him what you're doing, and now all of a sudden you go, no, I'm not going to tell you. What is he? He's pissed. Why is he pissed? Because he no longer has anything to collect evidence to support the right thing that he should say.
I tell guys that are, whether it's guys in our shootouts or any up and coming pro rider, I say the one thing I'll tell you about testing: be honest. if you don't feel a difference, it's okay to say, I don't feel a difference. I can't tell.
I have a list. Yeah, I have a list of procedure for testing that I talk about in the seminar. It's like one of the things on there is if you can't tell any difference, let the rider know if it's okay not to tell any difference.
Yeah.
For many riders, it's psst, oh, thank God I can actually tell. If you can't tell, you can't tell. And what I tell them is it's one of two things. Either the change that I made wasn't big enough for you to be able to tell, or you just can't tell.
Yeah.
And it might be, I've had riders go and they changed lines and all of a sudden they had a problem go away. They rode around the bump. Well, what about that kicking? Oh, it's not kicking anymore.
I moved 6 inches to the left. It's great.
I'm not even hitting that bump. They don't tell you they didn't hit that bump. So anyway, low speed affects high speed. High speed does not affect low speed. But what range that high speed and what velocity that it actually affects depends on how that adjuster was actually set up. Okay, so some of the adjusters, but if you can have somebody else make changes, you do the testing without knowing what's going on and then kind of go, oh, I think it's doing this. I think it's okay to say, I think it's doing this.
Yeah.
But the most important thing you can do is be willing to be wrong.
Yeah, that's it. And guys, or just admit I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know it.
I can't tell.
Yeah, I can't tell.
I can't tell.
You got to be able to say that or you'll go in circles.
Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to ask you about, and it happens on the fork a lot to me. Not a lot, but it happens occasionally. It happened with a Kawasaki test I did recently. I want a softer, more plush feel to the front end. Mm-hmm. So what do? I go softer, and I keep going softer and softer and softer with the clicker, and it's not getting better. In fact, it'll get worse. And I'm like, what the heck's wrong with this thing? The clicker's broken. And what has happened is I needed to go stiffer. So I'll take it back to stock and then go too stiffer. And I'm like, oh, that's better. Mm-hmm. That's giving me the little plushness I want initially. And that's better. And I want you to just explain what's happening where I'm too far down in the stroke. I've made it so soft. I'm down further into the stroke where now it's feeling harsher.
Yeah. So you understand the concept of packing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Packing is having too slow a rebound damping so that when it compresses, by the time it hits, getting ready to hit the next bump, it's not all the way back out ready to hit the next bump. Okay. So it basically does kind of, it does this as it goes through a series of bumps. You can actually pack down. You can actually have something packed down. Street bikes packed down, road race tracks without hitting it, just having the little vibration of the thing, because those guys are so used to running so slow a rebound damping. Mm-hmm. The thing will pack down. And so the problem is as it packs down, you've got three components. Friction, bad, right? You've got a spring force and a damping force. The damping force is only dependent on the movement, but the spring force is ramping up the deeper it is into the travel. So as your front end is compressing more, if you're into the travel and now you hit a bump, it's got to overcome the spring force in order to be able to move. Mm-hmm. So there are certainly times where you're deeper into the travel, you've got a higher spring force. That's the feeling that you're getting from it. Okay. And yeah, I've gone out testing with guys before. Hey, is it bottoming? 1 in 20 guys can tell if the rear end's bottoming. 1 in 20. 50% of the guys maybe can tell if the front end is bottoming. People have much better connection with the front end than they do with the rear end. But the rear end, only 5% of the people can tell if the rear end's bottoming.
Wow.
And so asking, hey, is it bottoming? Yeah, it's a good thing, but you really want to have some kind. That's where data acquisition is phenomenal. That's where having zero tire defender clearance and putting a piece of tape on the bottom of it to see whether that only tells you one time, but that's where data acquisition works well. I've gone out testing with a guy. No, it's not bottoming. No, it's not bottoming. No, it's not bottoming. Put data acquisition on it. It's bottoming 23 times hard in a lap.
Gosh, that's crazy.
And the rider can't tell. My bike might be kicking. It might be so going the other direction, making it stiffer. All of a sudden, oh yeah, that's way plusher. What?
Now, does the same theory apply to the front that we talked about in the rear with opening up rebound? If I opened up the rebound in the front, will that now keep me do the same thing, similar thing as stiffening compression, where it's going to get it back down quicker to the ground and keep me in that soft spot where I like that plushness?
It can, again.
Not as critical as in the rear, you think?
Yeah, not as critical in the rear, and the range of adjustment typically on the front end is not as big as what you typically get on a. The adjuster that typically has the biggest range of adjustment is the low-speed rebound on the shock. The front adjusters don't have typically as much effect, and one of the things with the rebound adjust, it can actually affect the bypass, so it can affect the mid-valve kind of a feeling on the front too. So the thing about it is that one adjuster, even though it's got a label of, rebound, it may not just affect rebound. Again, the rear shock too, when, if you don't have a rebound separator valve on there, it goes in both directions. You back the thing out. Yeah, it got better for grip, but now it's too mushy. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's why we have a rebound separator valve. But anyway, without getting, too technical about it, that's part of the development process of setting up suspension. It's part of the fun too. The neat thing about suspension is you don't like it, you can always put it back.
Yeah.
People
are scared to turn those clickers. I find that, when I thought, I did a couple clicks, but I couldn't tell. I don't want to mess it up, so I just put it back and left it.
Well, and again, that adjuster might not have. Normal scientific studies show that human beings can typically tell a 10% change. Okay, now riders can actually tell 5%, especially better test riders. Less than 5%, there are only a few people. There are some guys, Vince Friese, it's like you can take it one click and he'll tell you exactly the same every single time. There are a few riders that can do that. Most riders cannot. Okay, and so if you look at plus or minus 5%, or 10%.
It's a big change.
5.0 spring and a 5.5, riders can't tell any difference. Okay, we sell springs in 5.0, 5.2, 5.4, 5.6. 5.0 to 5.5, they can barely tell the difference. Okay, so can we tell the difference, and can riders? Yeah, 5%, but if you look at it and go, okay, let's cut that in half, most riders can barely tell the difference between one spring rate that we sell. And in fact, fork springs, for example, we used to sell them 4.0, 4.2, 4.4, 4.6, 4.8, et cetera, et cetera. Then we do our calculator on there, but it calculates down its mathematical calculation, and it says, okay, run a 4.7 or a, whatever. And they go, you don't have a 4.7. So they go off to some other company to buy a 4.7. The truth is they couldn't tell the difference between a 4.8 and a 4.6.
Right.
Okay, but what do we do now? We actually split rates. First of all, our springs are the highest level of accuracy and consistency on our springs. Our springs are the best springs on the planet. My opinion, I'm sticking to it for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is that we're very, very accurate as far as the springs are concerned. Typical spring rate manufacturer is plus or minus 5%. That means that when you buy a spring that's a 5.0 and a 5.4, they could be the 5.4 could be softer than a 5.0. Okay, so but what we do on fork springs is we'll match them. We'll go a 4.6 and a 4.8, put one 4.6 and one 4.8, put them together. There's your 4.7. Okay, and then some people go, "Oh, you just now my bike is dude, you've got single function forks that have one spring in one leg and damping in the other, and you think that the front end, the axle is so mushy that the front wheel is going sideways? No, you can't.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it for 40 years, mixing and matching. But anyway, so did I answer your question?
Well, it's probably impossible to get an answer out of that. I'm trying to, it isn't just as simple as this does that.
Well, and
does that.
If I would say anything, I would say go out and learn that yourself for your own bike. Have somebody else make the changes and write down what your feedback is. And do not let them tell you what they're actually doing.
Yeah, learn on your own.
Yeah, so learn on your own. But
okay, I want to just a couple more questions here. You did a couple of things that were interesting to me that I didn't know about. You raced Pikes Peak. Mm-hmm. I want to hear a little bit about that, and then some land speed record thing you did.
Yeah, actually I got hooked up with Paul Livingston and Rod Faulkner, And they came in and they were building a 125 turbocharged Honda for doing land speed racing. And I was, we'll do anything, right? We do. And this is actually where Rob is a genius at. This is actually a little bit before when Rob came in. And so, I was talking to the people and anyway, I turned the front fork. So, we have leading axle forks, right? And they said, all it's got to do is go straight. All I wanted to do is go straight. I turned the front axles around backwards. It didn't need a front brake. I turned the front lugs around backwards.
Oh. Man,
I have a picture. And so they took it to,
and that increases stability?
Yeah, increases trail. So it's just front end trail and geometry. So again, we talk about this stuff in the seminars, and trail geometry, triple clamp offset is one of the least understood by moto guys variable that there is, period. Okay, so triple clamp offset. So people get that, all right? So fork tubes, steering stem, the amount of offset. Mm-hmm. What they don't get is most people get it backwards. The more offset you have, the less trail you have, the less stability. Most people think, oh, well, I've got a longer wheelbase. It's more stability. No. It's less trail. Trail is the amount that the contact patch of the front wheel trails the steering axis. So
I've seen it on a chart. Hey, this is, again, where my math, I lose it.
So anyway, I could, with some drawings and stuff, you would get it. It's not extremely difficult, but what it is that people have it backwards. Mm-hmm. And, in fact, a lot of triple clamp manufacturers, they're not geometry guys. They're
this
machinists.
Is why road race bikes are a little bit more a steeper angle, right? Because that affects trail, which affects high speed.
Affects trail. It has to do with weight bias. Mm-hmm. Also with rake, the more you have something raked out, the more just loading that bike. Telescopic front fork, its Achilles heel is that it wants to lock up when you put a side load on it. When the front wheel hits a bump, there's a component of that force that's trying to compress the suspension. There's a component of the force that tries to bend it in half. Mm. The component that tries to bend it in half is trying to lock it up. If you have more rake and it's sitting out like this, just the weight of the bike is trying to lock that front end up.
Right.
But it hits the bump at a better angle. Higher percentage of it actually is trying to compress it. Okay, there's a trade-off with all that stuff. But anyway, back to Bonneville, right?
Yeah. So what is the bike you're riding?
Well, I wasn't riding that one, but that was the first bike that they did. It was a CR125.
Okay.
2-stroke. They turbocharged it, and we're doing land speed runs on it.
Okay.
Okay. I think the record at that time was 110 miles an hour or something like that. So anyway, so we get into relationship and friendship, and Paul goes, "Hey, come on out to Bonneville. We'll get a bike and you can ride." And I went, I've seen it in Cycle News for how long, right? And you see it looks like they're on snow and, it's like it's just surreal. And I went, I usually say no to everything, but yeah, let's do that, right? And so we got to Bonneville and, they got me leathers and the whole works. And there was a bike and I was riding a ZX14. Actually, that wasn't the first bike. The first bike that I rode was a CBR 600 and it was going to be on nitrous. And you've got to license up. You can't just go full speed on the thing and you license up.
What do you so CBR 600, what do you run for tires? You're not running street tires.
Street tires.
Really?
Yeah.
Is the dirt hard?
It's not dirt. It's salt.
Okay.
Okay, so the salt is interesting. The salt, sometimes it's wet. Oh, excuse me. It's always wet.
Okay.
Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the traction's good. Sometimes it's smooth. Sometimes it's rough. Sometimes it's salt like you shake it out of a salt shaker. But it's always wet.
Okay.
Okay. So salt conditions are an interesting thing. So I'm sitting there on my very first run. The wait in line was 4-hour wait. We finally get up to where I'm going. The guy in front of me was in a car and does a flat spin at the 2-mile marker in his car. Like that. And just as you go over the circumference of the earth and he's disappearing, you see this salt just spray.
Oh no.
So I'm just I'm not feeling really good at that moment in time. But anyway, the point is that and then he dug up all the salt, right? Anyway, they had the nitrous bottles mounted on this thing, and it was too close to the chassis. Whenever it would hit a bump, and this is pretty rough, whenever it hit a bump, the nitrous bottle would hit the swing arm, and it'd go clunk, 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 right? And it would also knock me out of the seat. But
it's that rough? I thought it was like quite smooth.
Sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's smooth, and it's always wet. Okay, so anyway, knocks me out of the seat. So I go, all right, and I just stand up. Meaning, flex, just get my butt off the seat that much because I'm not going to waste this run. I just waited in line for 4 hours in the freaking sun, right? Anyway, I go and do this thing and I was hooked. This was just so much fun. And
how fast did you go?
The first time was 150 miles an hour because that's the max that I could go. Right?
Okay.
I ended up. I think 15 or 16 land speed records I set.
Is that right?
Yeah, and did ZX14, did 750 nitrous. If you've ever ridden a bike on nitrous, it is just, you hit the button and it goes like that. I mean, just like your face gets pushed back. It's just amazing. But my biggest, and I really appreciate those accomplishments. I actually got hooked up with the guys that own Lightning motorcycles, electric motorcycles. So Richard Hatfield. And they had a handling issue that they knew I was out there and I had my sticks and whatever. So here's rule number one about chassis. The rear wheel and the front wheel should be pointed in the same direction. And so they come to me and they go, man, we're getting 150 miles an hour and we're going to tank slappers. And this is Steve Atlas is the racer, the rider, and he's a fairly small guy, road race guy, and journalist, right? And rain delayed event. They come to me and said, man, this thing's doing tank slappers. So I go check the thing out. The front wheel and the rear wheel were off by over an inch.
Dog tracking or whatever they call it?
Just like this. And so, and not only that, but the aerodynamics, these are all hand-built everything, and the aerodynamics was off another inch. So you get up higher speeds, the thing was just, Steve Atlas says he's most scared he's ever been on a motorcycle in his life. Anyway, I straightened the thing out, and they went like, 152 miles an hour, or 154 or something, right? And but basically it was a rain-delayed event. Steve had to get on a plane and go. They didn't have a rider for the last couple of days. And so Richard comes to me, he says, hey, and we had actually set a goal to race electric motorcycles. But that's an expensive deal. This back in 2010 or something like that, right? Okay. 20, maybe 2009, something like that. Anyway, he comes to me and he says, hey, would you ride our bike? And I went, all right, and I had actually just I went 199 miles an hour on a nitrous 600 Honda. And you have to do 2 runs. And we were in impound with that bike. But anyway, so I hooked up with Richard, like twist my arm, right? And I go out there, and I'm on the, it's blinding bright, and the light, off the salt and everything, right? So I've got a smoke windscreen, polarized windscreen. Well, Richard had a smoke windscreen on the bike. Okay. Polarized. Have you ever taken 2 polarized and they're lined up and then it goes completely black?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, yeah, you can, do that. And anyway, so I get out there, I take off. And again, sitting in line for 3 hours or whatever it is, right? And all of a sudden I tuck in, right? And what you do is you virtually, your aerodynamics, I put my chin on the tank and I push down so that my head would get pushed back so I could get underneath as much, right? As much as I can. As soon as I get behind that windscreen, it's black. I can't see anything.
Do you need to see where you're going? I mean, you're just going straight, right?
It's black. Well, let me just say, you might not, but I sure do.
Yeah,
anyway,
no, it would freak you out.
So, yeah, no. And so basically there are 2 stripe lines, and it's, 20, 30 yards wide is the track. And I go, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And so I went over to the left-hand side. So the short course is a 3-mile run. You got 2 miles to get up to speed, and then you've got a flying mile to do the average speed over, right? Okay. So I'm in the first 2 miles, right? And I go over to the left side, and I just look down at the ground at the stripe, right? I don't know if you've ever tried
It's
to
like driving
ride
in
that
the
way.
fog, but doing 100.
Oh my God! Yeah. So what I would do is I go, that doesn't work, right? And I'm looking down and one of the reasons why I would say that didn't work is that they have mile markers made out of PVC pipe every quarter mile. I nearly plowed through a mile marker going 130 miles an hour. And I went, okay, that's not working, right? And so then I pulled over into the center of the lane. And what I decided to do was every 10 seconds, I go like this.
Pop your head up like a
Pop my head
ball.
up, right? Yeah, I'd pop my head up and I'd see that I was in the right. So do you need to see? At least some of the time.
Yeah, a
right?
little bit.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going along at whatever it is. I finished that run and I went 161 miles an hour. I went, I maybe it was 6 miles an hour faster than what they did, right? And Richard comes to me and he goes, "You just went faster." And we went all week with Steve Atlas. He's a professional. He's smaller than you are. And you just went on your very first run, you went faster than him by 5 or 6 miles an hour. And I says, well, an experienced Bonneville racer at these speeds is good for 5, 6 miles an hour. I made that shit up. Anyway,
It was the porpoising of the helmet that really.
it was the porpoising of the helmet, but because basically it's power versus drag.
Yeah.
Mechanical and aerodynamic. And anyway, so I would just pop up and down, and I went that fast. Anyway, I was his rider from then on. And so they actually built different motorcycles, and I was there with the evolution. I was actually the first guy to go over 200 miles an hour on an electric motorcycle.
Oh, is that right?
Yep. And I actually am the current world record holder at 216 plus, so top speed of 218.6 on electric motorcycle. That record has not been broken today, and that was set in 2011.
Wow.
The reason why is that they've been pumping salt out of the Bonneville and selling the salt. The salt it used to be like this thick. Now it's this thick. And if it goes into dirt, it's a whole different thing. So they haven't had suitable conditions for
Wow.
for a long time.
They may never break it. May never do it again, huh?
Well, there are places that you can go on asphalt and whatever. Asphalt, I used to think that the traction's sketchy on Bonneville and it was more dangerous. It's more dangerous on asphalt because what happens, especially those guys, Hayabusas, right? They've got 500 horsepower, turbo Hayabusas. They can wheelie, they can carry the front wheel a long time. Those guys will actually burn the tire for 5 miles
What?
on the long course. They'll burn the tire.
On salt?
On salt.
I guess I don't know anything about. I thought it was dirt with some salt in it. You're telling me it's just a sheet of salt.
It's salt. It's salt on top of dirt, and it's always wet. You dig down in there, and it's, it rains and the salt. Anyway, it's something if you ever got a chance to do, just to get out there.
Absolutely
if
not.
they ever did it.
There's no way. No.
Anyway, but yeah, people give me crap. They say, well, it's just going straight. I could tell you stories. Yeah, but yeah, it is just going straight.
But it's going straight at
But
219.
Anyway, so that was the Bonneville thing, and there's a lot of stories in that one. But anyway, I won't. But Livingston also did the Pikes Peak race. They basically got the bike set up and et cetera, and organized the team and et cetera. So for Ducati.
Oh, okay.
And so we were setting up the suspension for the Ducatis, and I actually got to race Pikes Peak on 150s.
Oh, wow.
CRF 150s. One of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. I ended up winning the race, so I'm forever a
Pikes Peak
Pikes Peak champion. And they'll never run that event again because they're not running motorcycles anymore, and they're not running 150s.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So yeah, I got to kick Alexander Smith's butt.
Look at you.
Look at me.
Well,
But anyway, yeah, they actually the Pikes Peak thing. That's, I don't know if you can see that.
Oh.
That forearm there.
What happened?
That was not being on the Pikes Peak. So remember, it's how you stop, right? So I didn't make it through the first turn. Once they got Pikes Peak was a tourist thing where they go up the hill to 14,000 plus feet elevation. It was a dirt road, tourist thing where tourists would drive up there at 20, 30 miles an hour or whatever, and sued by the Sierra Club and said, okay, you got to pave this thing because the dust was getting into the water and
killing the Colorado tree mite.
yeah, well, it's whatever. I mean, it's like, okay, I get it. All right. And so over a period of 10 years, they paved the thing. They pave it in sections, right? Because obviously weather and whatever. Anyway, as long as it was a combination of dirt and pavement, it was a supermoto setup. Once it became fully paved, it's a road race setup.
Yeah.
The thing is that when you go off, you do 3 days of practice on 3 days prior to the race, and there's a day off, and then you do the race. When you do the race, you don't pre-run the thing, okay? So it's a time of year where you can get ice melt. The ice melt then freezes maybe in the, that night before. You can go around a turn, and all of a sudden you've got ice that you're going through. Not only that, but the cars may have, they'll hang a wheel off the inside and kick DG up onto the rest. So it's a really, really sketchy race if you're hanging off to the inside. Not nearly as much because, when you're on a supermoto and you're on top of that bike, if the bike, steps out, at least you got a fighting chance, on that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so once it was fully paved, I went, I'm not doing this anymore.
Well, so how'd this happen?
So they wanted me to come back and be the podcast announcer for it, right? Okay. And I go, sure. And I'm up there for practice days, getting to know the guys and whatever. And I said, hey, could I ride practice? And they go, nah, we don't have insurance for you. You're not a participant. So, but you could be safety crew. Okay. So this is evidence that I may be the world's worst rider. You know how it's like local pro and racing with, Johnny and the boys. It's like I may be the world's worst rider because I borrowed a Ducati. I hit the stripe, the yellow stripe.
Yeah.
Did not make it through the first turn, but I'm going 80, 90 miles an hour, and I shot off the side of the mountain, hit a tree, and dropped 20 feet. And the tree actually saved my life. I actually hit the tree with my arm across my chest like that. This is crushed in here, a couple plates, a whole bunch of screws, 19 screws.
So it looks like a skin graft. Is that what happened?
It is a skin graft. And basically, they had just figured out a little, a year earlier or so, that when damage is this great and they cast it, what they used to do is they get them out of the cast and then, a year later, they'd end up amputating. And what they found was that the cast held it too tightly so that the swelling was so great that the pressure in there would actually kill off the new cells. Mm-hmm. And so they don't put you in a cast anymore. They put you in a splint. And what this is skin taken from my hip to allow it to expand.
Gotcha.
And
I've heard that hurts, like where it pulls out, where they pull the skin off. Is that painful?
You
hit a tree at 80, so I guess.
I hit a tree at 80 miles an hour. The fall. Seriously, if the tree hadn't been there, I would have landed on the rocks down below. The tree saved my life.
Jeez.
And, it's like Paul Livingston was there, sitting there watching the race, or not the race, the practice, and talking to the paramedics, and he go, was that survivable? And they go, we don't know. So a lot of people saw. The next thing I remember is waking up, and they're pulling my ring off. And apparently I was telling jokes on the, whatever. And
that might have been the morphine talking.
I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, that was
Jeez.
bike speak. And yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your family. It sounds like you got started late with kids. How long have you been married?
30 years.
All right.
Yeah. So I got started late. I actually, Nancy's my wife. She's phenomenal woman. I met her in a personal growth seminar, and of course my joke is, anyway. But anyway, we met in the personal growth arena. She was somebody that I was, I've been the head down, just get the work done. But I met her and just love at first sight, and I said, okay, this is the woman I'm going to marry, and we. Didn't have kids for a while, and actually when we started to think about doing that, it was kind of too late, and so we went through in vitro a whole bunch of times, and ended up, we go, well, we want a kid. So my wife gets on the internet and finds our oldest son, and he's actually at an orphanage in Kazakhstan.
Oh, wow.
And so my wife is Korean, Filipino, and I'm not, and anyway, Kazakhstan is one of those countries that's been overrun, China, Russia, this, that, whatever is, and so it's very much a mixed race, kind of a deal. And anyway, so she saw him online and said, this is our kid, and and I said, okay, well, where do we, Kazakhstan? I'm going, what? And so we went over there. She actually stayed. We went over to meet him after. I mean, it took forever to be able to get through the paperwork and all that stuff, but we ended up getting him. And I actually went down to Australia to teach seminars. She stayed. So normally you're supposed to like meet him for a couple weeks and then leave and then come back. Make sure you're serious about this kid and you're not like sending him back after cries or whatever. Yeah. And she stayed, and it's like winter's coming in, and
in Kazakhstan,
she's by herself in Kazakhstan, which is about as much courage as I've ever seen anybody display. I don't care, freestyle, whatever, whatever. That was
Kazakhstan.
Yeah. So
isn't that where Borat is from?
That's it. That is it. That is it. Actually, yes, I tell my son that all the time. Anyway, but I went to Australia. That was summer, just coming on down there. We rode motorcycles and did the seminars and went down to the MotoGP down there and Phillip Island and just had a ball. And anyway.
So then does she bring him home and you guys met at home?
I met her back in Frankfurt, and then we flew back home. And so he's our firstborn.
That's awesome.
And then, she comes to me like, I don't know how many years later, 6, 7, 8, whatever more years later. And she goes, I want a girl. And I'm all, okay, well, let's get tickets to Kazakhstan, and she goes, no, I want it to be ours. And I went, honey, we've gone through in vitro like 4 or 5 times. It's like, what? And she goes, no, I want it to be. And so we go, and different doctor and whatever. I think the doctor's name was Dr. Hatch, which seems fully appropriate.
It does, yes.
And we put in 2 and had twins.
Wow.
It was mind-boggling. So boy and a girl. So they're 13 now. And just, I'm a blessed man. All I can tell you is that.
You're like, who's the biblical character? Was it Sarah and anyway. One of them thought she was barren and she had kids really, really late. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'll have to get back in my
anyway,
clearly I'm showing my lack of understanding of my book, but
yeah. But no, my youngest son is into basketball. He's tall and skinny, and
Is your wife tall?
No.
Oh.
No, but her grandfather was.
Okay.
And she got some Chinese in her, and my grandfather was. So, but people always look at us and go, where'd them kids come from?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
My son is supposed to be like over 6 foot, 6'2".
Is that
like
right?
That, so we'll see. But it's funny. But I was just telling this. And I won't tell the story. She'll listen to the podcast.
Don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I don't need to get myself in trouble. But anyway, no, our kids are great. And
do either of the boys ride at all?
my oldest does. A little bit here and there. But he got into mountain bike racing. He's actually in the music industry, training for that right now. And like I said, my daughter is volleyball and all that stuff. But all his friends are into basketball. He's got a really good shot, and he's
cool.
having a lot of fun. And I don't twist anybody's arms. So
no. You got to let them find their passion.
Yeah.
And it's actually fun. My girls did soccer. I was never into soccer. My wife played a little bit. I think that's why she pushed them that way. But I loved getting to experience a different sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm glad I didn't have to. I see like the Nick Ways, these guys that have boys and now they're just back into going to Loretta's, going to all the races, and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah. No, my oldest son, he raced mountain bikes. Like I said, he raced for 8 years. I continued to race after he went off to college.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. But it's not the same. It's like I just having him and being able to spend that time. And it's a brutal sport, especially to do completely on your own, kind of thing. But
you're suffering.
Yeah, it's a suffering sport. I got to hand it to all those guys. But anyway, I mean, like I said, I've just had a blessed life, and be able to have that kind of passion, in my life for what I do, kind of in all aspects. I'm playing golf now more than ever. And
are you?
Yeah. Well, I was at your tournament.
Yeah,
two
that's
years
right.
ago.
That's right. You'll have to come again this year. It's going to be
yeah.
Sunday after Paula.
Yeah. No, I'm glad, because it conflicted with seminars last year.
Oh, okay.
So we couldn't. But if you remember, 2 years ago, I had my knees. I couldn't hardly even walk.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And no, there's some neat stuff going on.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you've certainly you certainly seem like a blessed man. You earned it though, and I loved seeing that. Like I said, guys of your generation, man, just hard workers.
Well,
because it's a recurring theme. All of you that are successful, it's like, I was putting in 7 days a week, 14-hour days, and you're like, yep.
Yeah, well, the thing, being willing to pay the price, I think is one of, kind of persistence and, all the attitude, but being willing to pay the price is, willing to pay the price. Let's go.
Yeah.
And
when you have a passion for it, you're willing.
And it's like, okay, let's keep doing this until the day I die, one way or another, something that, if it's not this, it's something else. It's like you were saying, it's like, okay, it doesn't have to be moto or basketball or whatever it is that but it's got to be something. Let's go.
Yeah. What is it? Hey, our Ethica Fit check. We've got an Ethica gift basket for you. Some socks, some hats. Cool. You can share it with your kiddos. They'll probably dig it. If probably steal it from you is what'll happen. But we appreciate those guys. You can get 20% off anything from Ethica using our code WHISKEY20. And our last question, we ask this of all our guests, is how you want to be remembered?
Boy, that's a good question. It's interesting. I really haven't been concerned with kind of being the guy in the limelight, I think that, with teaching the seminars, and I did a video called Mental Edge, which we don't need to get off on that one either, but I did, mental side of the sport of motocross, and I think that it made a difference. And I think that when I do the seminars, it helps people. People have come in as plumbers and end up being, world-class suspension tuners. A lot of the people that have worked for me, there was one period of time when all the techs that worked at Showa all were former employees. It's like whether, and then, you got your Kaipos and, Rob Hendrickson, and, it's just like all the guys, not just those guys, but people that come to the seminar. And when we do the seminars, there's a little bit of philosophy, and we'll tell jokes and, on and on. But, people are able to change their life. And when I would like to be probably remembered as somebody that cared about not only what I do, but the people that are around me, whether they're employees or whether they're customers or, seminar students or whatever. And I think that we've moved the needle in the, suspension industry, just as far as kind of the quality of the work that's done, and et cetera, et cetera. I certainly don't take credit for anybody's work that they have done, but I'd like to think that I've made a difference.
Yeah. I think that's obvious, man. I mean, we didn't talk about all of the list of riders you've worked with. We mentioned a few. It's long. It's very long. I used your stuff for a long time, and I always love working with you guys.
Yeah.
And I think just listening to you speak about it, your depth of understanding and blows way past what a mere mortal like myself can understand. But
let me interrupt for a second too. I really gotta to say that the success that I have today, to a very, very great extent, is a result of the employees and the people that are surrounding me. Mm-hmm. I mentioned Rob Brown and Sydney a number of times. Without them, we probably wouldn't even be sitting here right now.
That's any business, right?
Yeah, and we've got I mentioned Wyatt, and Andrew, the engine guy, is just unreal. And we, the thing about what we do, we are not in the limelight. Meaning, much of the suspension that we do doesn't have our stickers on it.
Mm.
Many of the engines that we do don't have our stickers on it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, we do a lot of stuff, and we sign NDAs with people. So we have a CNC Rottler, which does CNC porting. You can bring you're an engine builder or whatever. You can bring your head design or whatever it is, and we can map it and digitize it and give you the same over and over and over again, and we can do all the machining work for you. We don't take credit for it. We don't do any of that stuff. It's like, so the focus of my business changed from, hey, send it in to me, we'll do all the work, to how can I help other people be successful doing this stuff? And whether it's suspension, whether it's engines, once we found Andrew, just to kind of put a bow on that thing, once it's 4 strokes and all that stuff, Andrew has become a phenomenal engine and builder. And you won't hear his name thrown out a whole bunch because he's behind the scenes. But the way we do it at this point in time is we call it the Racetech Power Plan. And if you go onto the website and look up a particular bike, it says, well, you need to do this, and this. And boom, here's how much it costs. You have to assemble it. We don't assemble engines, So you go and follow the power plan. You will build a world-class engine. We promise you, world-class, that's reliable. And we can tell you why it's going to be reliable. And what you need to do is make sure you change the oil, make sure you clean your filter, and here's your regular maintenance schedule. And it's not like 20-second time bombs. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours on a 250 engine, not uncommon. But anyway, I'm kind of got off on a sidetrack again, but the people that I have around me, whether it's my salespeople, the tech support, whether it's Louis, whether it's Christy, even my production guy, LJ, I've just got phenomenal people around me. Yeah. And I gotta give them all the credit in the world. Yeah. So, and I appreciate you letting me have this opportunity to do that. Of course, too, man. To thank them.
Those folks wouldn't attract quality people if you weren't a quality person yourself. Well, so you've obviously created a good place to work.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I love the new philosophy you guys have, kind of an abundance mindset. Instead of going, no, I got to protect this little thing, you're going, hey,
here it is.
Yeah, let me help more people.
Yep.
I like that. It's an honor to know you, buddy. I really appreciate what you've done to the sport and your involvement and working with us on the media side. I just
love it and love what you do.
Yeah,
I really appreciate. Glad your personality is in the industry and you doing what you do. So
we're trying. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, guys. Stick around. We'll be back to wrap up the show. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Paul Thede. All right, guys, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was definitely more technical than I think any of us have listened to before on this show anyway. Usually it's more about the individual, but he's such an engineering brain, and you can see that in some of the questions. It's like I'm trying to get just a simple answer out of him, and it's like it's not a simple answer. He's got all of these details, going around in his head. But I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. Racetech's been around a long, long time, and for good reason. He's done some incredible things in the suspension world and now the engine world as well. So I don't know how many of you guys built your own motorcycle at 9 years old, but it wasn't me. But thank you guys. I appreciate you tuning in and supporting the show. Please support our sponsors. These guys on the screen here behind me keep this coming to you. So thank you to all of those brands, and thank you for watching and listening. More shows coming. Stick around.